Before the decades-spanning multi-billion-dollar genre-warping MMO,
This really kicks ass, doesn't it?
before the Milk incident, there was Warcraft. While the entire Warcraft trilogy is privileged with existing entirely before modern Blizzard, the things it established carried on into World of Warcraft and lit the globe on fire. So maybe there's something worth analyzing here. We'll be looking at the full Warcraft trilogy, but I need to be clear that Warcraft III is the main focus, and you simply don't get one of the very greatest without its predecessors. Warcraft 1 is, well, it's something anyway. Warcraft 2 might actually kill you. And the third game endures as one of the most resonant video game stories, not for the content of its plot, but for the mechanisms it uses to tell that story. So let's set the stage. Flashback to 1994. Blizzard is still a young dev studio with games like The Lost Vikings and Rock and Roll Racing under their belt. Blackthorn came just 2 months before the original Warcraft. This one title would end up key to Blizzard's identity through multiple eras. Diablo and StarCraft both released after Warcraft's sequel. It was the company's guiding series. And aside from green dudes and knights, it's almost unrecognizable. If you've never played an RTS, they're pretty easy to describe. You collect resources and build structures with workers, then churn out enough soldiers to crush somebody else. Told in a sentence, they're simple. Micromanagement, options, and efficiency complicate things, but at the end of the day, it's green people versus people. Despite all appearances, Warcraft Orcs and Humans is not the first RTS, nor the first RTS with functional multiplayer. It just happened to launch during a brief lull in the genre's early days and took inspiration from enough recognizable properties that it managed to establish itself with a single entry. You don't get Warcraft without Warhammer, and surprisingly, Doom. Warcraft started as a would-be licensed Warhammer title, or at least that was the intention. Patrick Wyatt, who produced the game, explained in an interview that while Blizzard's co-founder Alan Adam set out to acquire the license, the bulk of the staff wanted creative control over their projects, which would have been heavily restricted under any sort of licensed agreement. They'd also struggled working with DC Comics on an earlier game, with another slotted for release in '95, and wanted out of that entire ecosystem. All of this was done for the sake of brand recognition, to help ship more units. The deal fell through, and the developers ultimately decided to twist what they already had into something original. That's original in unbelievably large quotation marks. By the way, for all its eventual success, Warcraft 1 was developed for the sake of utility and efficiency. Blizzard had launched successful games before, but you don't scrap a potential project just because Games Workshop won't play ball. Warcraft might have avoided being Warhammer adjacent, even. The core game idea was conceived as a cross between their earlier title, The Lost Vikings, and Lemmings, so hordes of Vikings under automated control who would fight each other in large-scale battles. Instead, it's the recognizable and barely legally distinct thing it is today. But the prototype wasn't all Warhammer. The game actually began with the developers taking the assets from popular RTS Doom 2, that is, quote, copying all assets from Doom 2 and redesigning them. They even unintentionally left the font of Doom 2 in the final version. Guys, typography matters. Give me a break with this shit. Warcraft, as a property, only exists incidentally. First as an unoriginal licensed work, and possibly only successful because it copied another game's homework. It's probably why the game's less appealing than the later ones. The spark is dull. I mean, it's fine and playable, it just doesn't sing, you know? And that's one of the joys of looking over the trilogy, seeing the ways the developers found themselves over time. This is the remake of the game, actually, something I decided to play for ease of access. The original DOS and Mac OS versions don't benefit from modern RTS controls, which are found in Warcraft 2 and on. In those versions, every kind of input you would expect to be able to do is gated behind an additional key input, which makes handling your full army and juggling its many units that much harder, especially with the innate limit on group sizes. It's not ideal. You could say that mechanical clunk lends some challenge to the game, which is true, and even has narrative implications, like the armies of orcs and men are completely useless and the commanders are idiots. But I don't think that actually serves the experience, so here we are. You can play the remake the way they packaged it, like this, but I prefer the older visuals. I grew up playing stuff like Mech Platoon, so I don't buy into every graphical upgrade as a given improvement. At least they're vaguely comic book-esque in keeping with Warcraft's artistic inspirations. I just can't help but feel a palpable contempt for sprited art. Like, who are you modernizing this for? This is Warcraft 1. You're not cracking a new market here, guys, think! And they've generously included a number of toggleable boxes to get the thing running how it mostly ought to.
So cool of Blizzard to put a button in the game that turns your screen into a big old poop smear.
Warcraft 1 is an intimidating game if you've never played through. Dated, prototypal, it looks like it's gonna break. But unlike its contemporary, Elder Scrolls Arena, it won't. It's probably the smoothest run of the broader Warcraft collection, with enhanced mouse controls, anyway. The aesthetic is unapologetically simplistic. The world doesn't change much. It's Fantasyland meadows, caves, or swamps. There is no snow, and you're the most active thing on the screen at any point. Thankfully, the remake shipped with a handy game speed toggle, which is super helpful in these first two Warcraft remakes where whole patches of campaign missions are dedicated to resource gathering, base building, and tracking the last stray unit all through the fog of war to finally win the match. Simplicity is the biggest selling point. Almost anyone could jump in and successfully amass archers to riddle enemy players, and it's entirely unconfusing, because even the story is paper thin. Actually, I have a funny story about the plot. When Bill Roper, producer and sole voice actor, was brought in to record, Blizzard had no script. They put him in a booth and maybe gave him a vague idea of what the game was about and what the missions were. And so all the text you see, Warcraft 1's story, was confabulated in a recording booth by a single guy.
Those are my favorite game dev stories. Like, look, everything was always on fire.
I want to mention music for a moment, not because it's mind-blowing stuff, but actually because it mostly sounds like a reimagined MIDI version of Holst's The Planet suite. These are different tracks, but you know, the inspiration isn't particularly subtle. It's true that a lot of art is purely derivative, but geez, this early game is a lot more interesting in retrospect, a mind-blowing snapshot in time when developers could more or less get away with running total clown shows because money and jobs were on the line. So what did Bill Roper come up with in that booth? You know, aside from the entire foundation upon which Blizzard built a multi-billion-dollar empire? Warcraft, Orcs and Humans more or less gives away the plot. Two factions are vying for control of Lordaeron. The humans, native inhabitants and general good guys, and the orcs, warlike, green-skinned, demon-worshipping invaders from another dimension. So, boring versus cool. The humans are pretty flat, just like what you'd expect from a generic fantasy kingdom defending itself from monsters. It's all milord and for honor and stop touching me, I'm uncomfortable.
Why do you keep touching me?
I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean it. I never thought I'd have to make this video, but there've been some allegations.
Now the orcs. Orcish identity is pretty key to Warcraft. It's been interrogated multiple times at different points over the course of the series, but here, in the first game, they're explicitly evil, and not just because they slaughter men. Everything the orcs do is framed in the negative, or more accurately, as diabolical.
The humans of Sunnyglade have become fat and lazy with their prosperity. The town is like a ripe plum waiting to be plucked. You will march upon their weak human armies and smash them to pieces.
In the human campaign, you free people, strengthen your cities, and quell a rising tide of evil. In the orc campaign, everything is nasty, sociopathic, and cruel. Orcs use necromancy to turn dead humans and even other orcs into servile soldiers. Orcs consort with demons. Orcs are primarily concerned with power and bloodshed. At one point in the human campaign, you're made to root out dissidents who betray your race to work with the Horde. In the parallel mission of the Orc campaign, you're made to march your armies on your own war chief, the leader of the United Orcish clans, to become the next war chief. Stage a coup, and not because he's gone mad or betrayed your people, but because you can. These aren't just different factions, they're completely incompatible. It's inarguably framed as good versus evil. What's actually interesting is how these armies manifest in mechanics. Warcraft III is so enduring in part because of its many different factions that lend a sense of identity to play. They're all mechanically unique and create an innately rewarding ecosystem with intense interplay. Despite being so unlike each other, the puzzle pieces fit, like any good romance. But ignoring the aesthetic dressing, almost every kind of unit in the original Warcraft is almost numerically identical to its enemy faction doppelganger. A footman and a grunt, the basic infantrymen of these opposing forces, have the same stats. They hit equally as hard, they have the same number of hit points, they cost the same amount of resources, and they take the same time to build. This is true of the vast majority of units found in either faction. They have an identical or nearly identical counterpart. Even the buildings are almost entirely equivalent, they just happen to spit out different units. The obvious assumption is that Warcraft was already a fairly strapped project, clearly not infused with any sort of vision, given that they handed off plot direction so freely, and so the factions are more or less the same because developer resources were tight. That and it's a multiplayer game, and so demands something resembling balance. But differences still exist. Humans get archers and orcs get spearmen. Archers have one additional point of range and do one less point of damage. Spearmen hit harder, but spears just don't fly as far. This incredibly minor difference paints the orcs as unsophisticated, even primitive. It makes humans seem more tactical, but less focused on brute strength. The strongest unit in either faction is actually a summoned creature. Wizards conjure water elementals for the Alliance, and warlocks summon demons for the Horde. Water elementals blast bolts of themselves, and demons are strictly limited to slashing distance, but deal significantly more damage. That minor discrepancy between archers and spearmen carries over and manifests in the extreme with these ultimate units. The real differences are found in their magic users. Human wizards call down a rain of fire, and orcish warlocks summon a cloud of poison. Whatever the humans can do, the orcs do it, but eviler. More significantly, human clerics can heal and render other units invisible, while orcish necrolytes can raise the dead and make others invulnerable with unholy armor. Cleric spells are about preservation of existing life and evasion, where necrolyte spells are mostly focused on suffering and brutal combat. If we consider the numerical similarities and account for the differences, which mostly come down to magic, the game, maybe unintentionally, makes it apparent that the real differences between these warring groups is culture. Orcs, as they're conceptualized here, are sociopathic and blood-hungry. They aren't trying to lift anyone up, and if they ever do, it's to cut them down later when it's convenient. It's an overly simplistic setting that arises from a general lack of developer concern, and Blizzard paid for it by having to reimagine and reconsider their own property for years down the line. It made for a killer campaign in Warcraft III, but some folks still bemoan the days when orcs were orcs and orcs meant evil. But Warcraft isn't just exposition and numbers. There is a game here, even if modern eyes might struggle to see it. RTS campaigns are usually designed to teach the mechanics. The idea is people would play the campaign, which drip-fed mechanics or scaffolded regular play, and eventually take their skills online. So an errant phone call could terminate their dial-up connection and tacitly inflate keyboard sales, which is probably why Blizzard felt comfortable offloading story direction to their voice actor. It was a low-stakes environment, and nobody figured that annoying millennial nitwits would be commentating video game plots on the internet decades later and deciding whether thing good or thing bad. But since they got their bag, I guess I'm the real sucker. Intentionally or not, the campaign has important moments and design quirks that have implications for the narrative and even the broader series. The game features two campaigns, Human and Orc, which run largely parallel to one another, mission over mission. For example, you'll raise a town in Mission 6 of the Orc campaign and drive the Orcs out in Mission 7 of the Human campaign. It makes for an interesting run and asks you to bounce back and forth to get a full picture, more or less taking either side in either major conflict eventually. Though most of them lack that kind of narrative interplay, and to be clear, it's the Orc campaign that's considered canon here, something that's revealed in Warcraft II, though various pieces of the Human campaign are also maintained as canon. Not that canon's worth chasing or revering, it's just that these two paths do diverge meaningfully at some point and don't tell a truly complete story in unison. By the end of the Orcish campaign, the Human capital city lies in ruins, and by the end of the Human campaign, the Orcs are routed, their armies scattered. It's worth noting that the Human campaign is slightly easier to play through overall. This isn't just baseless conjecture or a vibe-based observation, it's about innate abilities and restrictions. Each campaign has a number of dungeon missions that hand the player a small army, and no means to recruit more. You're forced to play carefully and tactically, often by baiting enemies into an ambush to preserve enough of your army to complete whichever dungeon. The humans have an easier time with this and barely need to make tactical use of their units because they're given the ability to heal with clerics, turning their dungeons into relaxing, casual strolls. Orcs, on the other hand, have no way to heal their units, and you feel every lost soldier in the slowly mounting challenge. You have to play tactically, play dirty, or fail. Even though they're invaders and love battle, they're equally at risk of death as any human and have nothing to prop them up or rely on. It's a small change of texture, the most minor mechanical difference, that completely reflavors these missions. Sure, you could use unholy armor to make a unit invincible for a while, but they lose half their HP instantly. Is it worth it? Will you run that risk? The first chapter of either campaign teaches the player to train workers and construct buildings. They can train soldiers as well, but it's actually optional. War is never ideal, but sometimes it's necessary. In the mission, you can avoid combat by training very few workers and mining what you can, but it'll take significantly longer, and if you see an enemy, you'll be attacked. Most players, like ever, will end up going to war in the first mission because it's nearly impossible to avoid playing blind. It's a small note, but at least interesting for its implications. The high road isn't so easily taken. Combat is inevitable in the second mission, as a steady line of units will approach your base one at a time, forcing the player to rush order a militia to defend themselves. The in-universe conflict is heating up, and neither side has the advantage. Things fall apart from there. Not that peace was ever an option. Remember, the orcs are the worst. The missions try to mirror each other, but there's one minor distinction that crops up after the intro. Orcs are frequently given less starting gold in their home base gold mine than their human campaign counterparts. It's an invisible advantage handed to the enemy, and the second major difference between the campaigns. In the human missions, both forces are typically given an equal amount of gold to mine, or close enough. The differential always widens in the orc campaign. Orcs have to go scouting, or fight for it once they deplete their initial supply. It's a narrative reality that the orcs are invaders and suffer from weaker infrastructure, but it also means the orcs have a harder time, or have to jump through hoops to succeed where humans don't. But the game is still packing curveballs. The human mission Sunnyglade will give you access to plenty of gold and a pile of mines to sample from, but you have to get your economy started from the ground up by freeing a group of peasants. There's no civilization without the promise of protection for its citizens, so you give them that. It's one of the key distinctions between orcs and men. The Black Morass, an orc mission where you fight your own people, gives you more gold than the enemy has access to, but they also have a fully completed fortress to wall you out. It's almost a necessity. RTS campaign missions can always be harder, scaling up to impossible brutality because they come down to AI efficacy and resources. Making a good mission is almost like crafting a good D&D session. The designer has all the power. Multiple missions across this series have a single-player army tackling several enemy bases, which could easily overwhelm the player if they were set to actively do so. But they aren't. RTS games are generally balanced around player versus player gameplay, and breaking that dynamic means the value of those story missions emerges from the narrative within, and not their innate challenge. In the Black Morass, the enemy stupidly focuses on spellcasters and summoning piddly spiders, which will leave them entirely open to a horde of spear throwers, the easiest and most commonly rushed unit type available to orcs. And this happens as the player character marches on Blackrock Spire, fresh from multiple missions just rushing spearmen, seeking to seize control of the orcish horde. You're rewarded for acting like you have and strong-manning the enemy, more or less accidentally fulfilling the story. Human players don't always have it easy, having to hunt down additional gold mines, though less commonly, by uprooting orcish encampments. In Northshire Abbey, where you fight human traders, the designers actually give you probable cause to strike them down by having them actively torching your base as you begin, something that doesn't even happen during the parallel orc scenario. It's careful to make you the hero, acting in self-defense. There's no guarantee that any of this stuff is intentional. It could all be happy accidents, but the play is the play, and it speaks all the same. It's interesting going back and reading player opinions on the two factions. Apparently some people believed orcs were superior because of their easy-use demons, which waddle into melee range and slap enemies to death, where humans had weak and fragile water elementals. Nowadays, a sweat-seasoned gamer probably knows that ranged units, regardless of minor strength differences, have the ability to kite enemies around with a little micromanagement. But back in the day, before modern mouse control, it would have been more frustrating to physically perform, to say nothing of the general state of dissemination at the time. Knowledge used to mean something. Humans were tactical, even with their inputs, and orc players wielded their armies like a cudgel, clumsily smashing whoever they could. It's simple, but there's a satisfying clarity in the play. Because the campaign is functioning mainly as a tutorial and not a narrative delivery device, the last two missions of either campaign mostly boil down to training wizards or warlocks, summoning hordes of conjured creatures, and stomping all over the other faction.
Superior tactics.
Most of the challenge comes from snuffing invaders before they can destabilize your win conditions, a giant army of freaks. It's not an overly challenging game, and especially because of the modern mouse controls. But that doesn't mean it's not valuable or a completely smooth ride. If anything, you're taught to defend yourself early before overcommitting to greedy economic expansion, because semi-frequent raids in the later levels, including invisible human enemies in the Orc campaign, force you to play at least a little defensively. When it's so easy to have your strongest units, spellcasters, cut down by invisible archers or enormous spells, when catapults can wipe you out for foolishly grouping up, the stakes are always high. The momentum can swing in a blink. A blurry vision for a dramatic universe is there, struggling to be realized. All this said, it's easy enough to amass 10 or so archers and demolish nearly anything. Warcraft 1 just wasn't substantive enough to last. It's almost impossible to find any kind of record of player versus player material outside of brief snippets of contemporary players arguing about whether this or that faction was stronger. As a game, it's as much dusty history within its own series as its plot events. Warcraft 1 needed to be more. And since it was financially successful, Blizzard set to work on reimagining their budding universe.
I know people hate that kind of sensationalist video title like the hardest strategy game you'll never play, but this is actually that though.
Warcraft 2 is a game caught between generations. Diablo would make Tremors 2 years later and StarCraft a year after that. Both of those games approximated 3D space with isometric camera angles. Early Blizzard is usually well remembered for its dark, gritty, physically grainy visuals, at least in their original work, but Warcraft 2 stands out, visibly, in their early output, stuck somewhere between Warcraft 1 and Lost Vikings 2. Warcraft 2 was a statement of identity, landing long before Blizzard properly breached the third dimension. It might not look all that interesting from a modern player's perspective, but what it represents for the series is significant, direction-defining, even. In a sense, it's Warcraft's real origin. Where the first game came about, incidentally, it was also successful, and that meant more Warcraft. And Warcraft 2 moved units. It was influential enough that reception to the earliest StarCraft prototype was somewhat negative because it seemed too much like Warcraft. Previewers weren't sure the sci-fi coat of paint justified a whole new game. That feedback influenced Blizzard to start from scratch and adopt the isometric camera angle. Warcraft 2 was influential. And that's probably hard for a modern player to wrap their head around. I started with Warcraft 3 myself, and only went back for this video. I never heard anybody talk about Warcraft 2, and probably because tech moves on, games come and go, especially in the multiplayer sphere. New things overtake the old, for plenty of people anyway. But it's a critical piece of history for how much it established. So what's it like to play? Warcraft 2 hates you and wants you to die. I should rephrase that. Warcraft 2 is mildly challenging. I can't let them know I struggled, or they'll take my gamer card. It's pretty rare I come across something so thoroughly unforgiving, but this thing is easily the hardest of the collection. It'll beat your ass, and especially in its expansion, Beyond the Dark Portal. Once again, I'm playing on the remastered version and using options to bring it more in line with its original aesthetic. But Warcraft 2 doesn't start hard, it breaks you in either campaign with small base construction missions and escort quests. Rescue an important NPC and bring them home. For a brief moment, the game's breezy, and then it ramps up. Still, Warcraft 2 should be, theoretically, highly playable for any RTS fan. It's got modern controls innately, a hotkey system that carried on into StarCraft and Warcraft 3. Nothing about base management is particularly confusing, and upgrades are all pretty straightforward. In fact, progression is strictly gated in a way that any player will easily understand partway through any campaign. If you want something, you have to build the requisite buildings first. You have to build up to expand. You have to expand to find the resources to build up. The real challenge comes from the contextual difficulty of the missions and the game's unique features. Warcraft 1 was flat. Everybody was landlocked, and that made for simplistic strategic play. You only have to consider the game in one dimension. In Warcraft 2, Blizzard added naval combat, and aerial units as well, and suddenly things are a little bloated. While many units have the ability to fire against flyers, meaning players aren't forced to account for specialized aerial combat scenarios all of the time, ships are mandatory in plenty of missions. You have to engage with a second, entirely separate battlefield, with its own buildings and its own resource, all locked behind its own building progression. You'll notice naval combat is not a core feature of Warcraft 3. Some missions turn into brutal slogs over land and sea. I was only ever familiar with the lore of Warcraft 3 when I played World of Warcraft, and so whenever they alluded to some epic historical battle, I couldn't quite picture it. Now I can say, damn, those fights were fucked up. The pivot away from pure land combat is a pretty transparent attempt to justify a game. A whole new feature. They'll love this! They'll love it, guys. It's hard to say if anyone actually asked if this was a necessary or enjoyable part of regular play. It's not like it's a black mark against the game. It just makes base progression clunky. At some point, you need to divert time and resources.
Time is money, friend.
To constructing this weird bum leg on your normal base where normal play happens so you can do special things elsewhere. This sounds extremely normal, am I right? Advancing your base just to unlock the means to build ships so you can drill for oil, so you can finally build ships, does not a nuanced and interesting game make. I think it mostly makes for stress. At least we don't have to build sky peons to, farm clouds. Otherwise, the play of Warcraft 2 is familiar. You still mine gold, chop trees, and build houses. You still want a small force to defend yourself while you expand instead of greedily trying to boom your economy without investing in soldiers. Trust me, they'll checkmate you early if you try. And in fact, Warcraft borrows a lot from its progenitor, despite its all of this. There are two campaigns divided into Orc and Human. One is slightly harder than the other, and one is effectively the canon route, except in the expansion where it's mixed. Despite the many names invoked during pre-mission debriefs, you don't see a ton of named characters except in special missions, or again, the expansion. It's flat, it's thin, but it's trying. Warcraft is a loud series, aesthetically I mean. Maybe owing to its Warhammer roots and obvious comic book inspirations, the art of Warcraft is brutal, epic, larger than life, exaggerated. Warcraft, and especially since 3, made a point of going over the top. But it wasn't until Warcraft 2 that the game started to find itself, an earnest visual identity. Just compare the first and second games. While the mission debrief screens were characteristic enough, the game itself was dead. Maybe the weirdest thing about the original game is wolf-mounted orc raiders. It's pretty darn stock. And suddenly, come Warcraft 2, we get face-painted trolls, two-headed ogre magi, rickety flying machines, submarines, juggernauts, giant turtles. It's a hodgepodge, a perverse, mixed aesthetic that's deliberately moving away from the cropped, safe dark fantasy vibe of the original. Apparently, Blizzard wanted to, quote, wow their fans with something completely unexpected. Fighter pilots fighting fire-breathing dragons. They thought Warcraft 2 could fuse fantasy with technology to become something truly unique, not unlike Final Fantasy. And that vision was scrapped, or severely toned down, but the roots for all Warcraft were laid here, with an intentional choice to push the boundaries and do something that suited the designers, instead of playing it safe. Apparently, Blizzard were told by marketing experts that in PC games, people mostly wanted gritty, low-key aesthetics, something that possibly influenced Diablo, but the developers weren't satisfied with dark and gloomy. And the benefit is, by creating something playful, they ended up speaking to players, allowed room for humor and earnest expression while maintaining a cohesive setting. It's why the game has a joke song accessible with cheats.
I'm a medieval man. What do you want? Why do you keep touching me?
It's an extension of the increasingly humorous lines you'd get from clicking units in the original.
Fuck off.
And it's what Blizzard carried on into Warcraft III. There are pandas imprinted on Illidan's warglaives. I say all of this with the knowledge that Warcraft II wasn't fully original just yet. It was still decently analogous to Warhammer Fantasy, and the two factions, Human and Orc, are still almost numerically identical. In fact, the factions are more similar by the numbers than they previously were. Almost no meaningful differences exist between the parallel units of either faction. Footmen and grunts, identical. Archers and axe throwers, identical. Unit costs, build times, range, almost completely identical. It's only in the abilities, in the magic, and in the culture that the two factions diverge.
Also, can we talk about how high this guy is?
Basically, knights and ogres can gain access to magic with an upgrade that turns them into paladins and ogre magi, respectively. The factions don't really diverge until this point. Paladins can learn to heal, exorcise the undead, and see through the fog of war for seconds at a time. They're warrior priests who protect their own and banish evil. By comparison, ogre magi summon a scout eyeball, they enrage your soldiers, and create piercing magical runes. Like you'd expect from the pre-modern horde, they're more about fighting than protecting. It's the flagship caster units that really define either faction mechanically. Mages slow targets, blast with fire and lightning, shield allies, turn them invisible, summon ice from the sky, and even transform living beings into sheep, effectively killing them, even if it's softly. They're a pretty good vision of the Alliance told through spells, able to defend themselves with terrifying power, fire, lightning, and ice, but also equally capable of self-defense. The way of the open palm, as it were. Mages have incredible utility. Like humans in most fantasy settings, they're unique for their adaptability. Death Knights are just about what you'd expect. They raise the dead, they drain the life from enemies, they trade the life force of their allies for unholy armor, they hasten their own warriors into battle, they summon uncontrollable whirlwinds, and they make anything, biological or otherwise, decay. The Orcs began their time in Azeroth as evil, and by 1995, the Horde was even worse. The split Orc and Human campaigns are divided into 4 acts each. They run parallel like before, but diverge at a critical point and don't follow the same back and forth, trading off progression. Instead, missions often portray either faction at the same place at the same time, instead of following one after another. In the first act, Orcs and Humans both build up a base, try to round out their ranks with allies, set up a naval installation at South Shore, and assault the first base either faction made in the end. At South Shore, the Alliance starts with more soldiers and faces less immediate resistance. Orcs have to deal with a good few enemies to expand outward and have fewer starting soldiers. In the final mission of the first act, Orcs are handed fewer starting farms, meaning they take a little longer to get rolling than the Alliance, but either faction has access to similar resources and faces equal opposition. It's possible that somebody wanted to communicate, in a very small way, that Orcish invaders would have to work a little harder on Alliance territory, just like before. It seems like the Alliance is set for an easier run, but things get a little complicated after. In Mission 5, Orc players are meant to raid the Human encampment just to the south to secure a gold mine. Alternatively, they can sail a bit to the west of the starting point for a free expansion, but they have to build everything from scratch. Human players start with a constructed outpost under siege and have to rush to save what they can. They're forced into conflict, but get a gold mine and some buildings. They technically get ahead faster, but only because they're pulled into battle. Mission 6 is an overworld dungeon for Orc players and surprisingly easy. You only have to ferry a single unit to a specific point and make sure he doesn't catch stray catapult fire. It's not really noteworthy except for acting like a break. Human players, conversely, have to defend a series of choke points, build up a base while spitting out units, and eventually scrub the map of any Orcish influence. It's fun, it's not overly challenging, but it's significantly more involved. The Act's final mission forces the Alliance through a long gauntlet, a mini dungeon crawl really, to eventually set up and tear down a huge naval installation. The Horde, conversely, gets a much shorter dash to get started, and it's less involved overall. The Alliance, who had things slightly easier, suddenly have it harder. In the human story, the Alliance successfully forces the Horde to retreat and routinely puts them in desperate situations. It's possible that Alliance missions are more challenging because the faction is framed as having the advantage, and they even overextend their forces to reach a quick and decisive end. Of course, the harder missions seem to be given to the canon faction, so maybe that's the real intention. Act 3 is where things finally get interesting. Humans in the Warcraft universe started out as the not-evil people. One faction of traitors existed in the first game. That's it. In Act 3, you have to quell a peasant uprising, ride your knights into town and put down the local populace, commit an act of suppression. This isn't framed as evil, and yeah, regional military powers were known to do this. But it's such a leap from how humans were established, always framed in the best light, even given plausible deniability, on the one human-on-human mission in Warcraft 1. And now we're killing peasants. In the 10th mission, you ferry traders back to base for questioning, and these aren't particularly easy battles. By the way, you get the sense that a war from within will tear the Alliance apart, which lends context to your drastic actions. This isn't just about orcs and humans, but law and chaos. Finally, at the end of Act 3, you face down the traders from Alterac Valley and their mixed army, raising everything with your newly trained wizards. You have to stomp out the internal conflict before it festers to win the war. On the flip side, orcs also struggle in Act 3, but in different ways. There is no orc-on-orc violence, the Horde simply turns its attention to Elven territory. This means a lot of long slogs through big maps. Because the Horde and Alliance paths diverge, they no longer have meaningful crossover. Different starting gold values could just as easily be contextualized as numerically relevant to whatever specific challenge, so I won't comment on them. You fight a lot of uphill battles, some of which really strain credulity. Mission 10 makes you create a base while surrounded by ice and enemies, and it's extremely pinched, and way too easy to suddenly aggro an enemy, so you'll probably end up resetting a few times because of the map's suddenly heightened expectations. But the others mostly just want you to amass Ogre Magi and steamroll the countryside. Act 4 is pretty straightforward for the Alliance. You battle across a series of gargantuan maps that fully illustrate the scale of the war. You dismantle every piece of the Orcish war machine to drive them out of your lands and through the Dark Portal. It's long, and it's hard. The Orcs, interestingly enough, probably face the stiffest resistance from their own people. Chapter 12 and the way it's constructed, what it specifically demands of the player, is so much more frustrating than many other Orc missions because you're forced to root out every scrap of resistance on this pinched, circular island. The following battles against the Alliance forces actually feel easier because one of them is just a light tutorial for using dragons, with the main challenge being surviving until you can recruit a critical mass of dragons. And the finale is a split-force base construction affair, desperately clinging to whatever you can in the face of waves of enemy invaders. While it's obnoxious, the game is sometimes easier when it comes to you. In Warcraft II, the human forces pursue the Horde across the world and eventually to the Dark Portal. The Horde simply demolishes the heart of human civilization. Of course, the Horde campaign isn't canon. Lordaeron never falls to the Orcs completely. It's hard to draw narrative conclusions from these missions, firstly because they're largely parallel, and because either side is so mechanically similar, the play doesn't communicate much more than what it is. The original game has louder narrative implications than its sequel, which makes the base game hard to appreciate on its own. This is what Warcraft III did so well, by utilizing multiple factions with palpable differences, and with hero units as well, something the dev team was only starting to see down the line. Blizzard released its Beyond the Dark Portal expansion in 1996. They initially handed off the job to Cyberlore Studios, who'd by then published a pair of small-time games and only ever survived long enough in the industry to develop Playboy the Mansion in 2005. When Blizzard checked in after a specific milestone, they found the project below standard and canceled the contract, taking on the work for themselves. The studio struggled to handle working with others. Creative control, quality assurance, their leaders had a vision, if nothing else. The expansion didn't come packing heat. Story missions weren't as much of a sell here as in Warcraft III, for example. It had custom maps for multiplayer and CPU play, but really what it hinged its existence on was showcasing Outland, the homeland of the Orcs, which is pretty ugly overall. The Dark Portal's real lasting achievement was heroes. Someone, somewhere thought, well, what if we made super units and gave them names, and made them matter? And that's all it was, but it planted the seed for everything after. Warcraft 1 had something resembling hero units. You fought Medivh, you ferried Garona to safety and Lord Lothar, and put one of the war chief's daughters down. But these people didn't matter except as blips, brief diversions from the main game, and always relegated to dungeons. Warcraft 1 made a point of turning large-scale battles into nameless, faceless macro conflicts, which is actually kind of brilliant. It conveys the nature of this war, and the scale, almost lost to time and impossibly large, so large that no one person could matter meaningfully. And yet Warcraft's budding personality demanded heroes, larger-than-life warriors to accompany its epic narrative. While a handful of named NPCs appear in the base game, they don't do much or get used for many missions. Beyond the Dark Portal, however, made them critical. Hero units are just souped-up versions of common ones. They don't have unique abilities the way they do in Warcraft III. Ilaria the Elven Archer is just an Elven Archer, but powerful. That doesn't mean she can take a beating, but they had to buff heroes just enough that they weren't getting picked off by stray dragonfire mid-battle. War zones are big, and even with unique models or coloring, it's not always easy to pick them out of your army at a glance. Heroes don't always have to survive to the end of the mission, but that depends on the mission. Given the general level of difficulty, you're bound to find that out yourself.
What? Why?
Regardless, they're linchpin units for most of the run, and some chapters are deliberately designed around them. The first human mission sees the player putting the band together, as it were, traveling through a space reminiscent of the dungeons in Warcraft 1, but set in a region of the world. You collect the mercenary Deneth, Turalian the Paladin, and desperately crawl from one end to the other, trying to stay alive and avoiding sudden ambushes. It's challenging, much more so than the human dungeons of the first game. Heroes are powerful, but they aren't the whole picture. You still rely on your infantry, on peasants you find in the map. You need to build a ship to cross the river. It's a really mild step into the hero dynamic, but important so the game doesn't completely uproot its identity for this new concept. One of my favorite missions of the human campaign involves defending your base with your assembled heroes, Griffin Rider Kurdran and the wizard Khadgar as well, naturally relying on other built units, but working together as a series of named heroes gives a much more real sense of the Alliance, and its different races working together towards a common goal. The Horde also has heroes, though fittingly they're allied by circumstance or through coercion. We see this in the first mission of the base game, Orc campaign, where the player is meant to ferry the troll Zul'jin to safety specifically to recruit him into the Horde, and not for any greater reason, at least according to the text. While the Parallel Alliance mission has the player saving the elves and hoping they'd maybe team up afterwards. But it's more pronounced in the expansion. You free Grom Hellscream, who mostly just likes to fight, and also recruit Dentarg of the Ogres, who's another loyal servant, not allied, servant of Ner'zhul, the Outland Warchief. Kargath Bladefist, who also mainly likes killing, Deathwing the Dragon, who is absolutely not an ally of the Horde at this time, but works with them anyway, and Terran Gorefiend, who believes in Ner'zhul's plan to open up dimensional portals for no evil purpose at all, and chips in. It's a league of all the worst guys who happen to work together. Sometimes. And it's expressed in the missions. You don't team up in a big party to protect yourself from annihilation. The only time you do, you're killing everybody and torching the countryside. For the most part, these heroes work on their own to accomplish whatever the missions demand. Heroes don't level up and don't do special things, but they lend a sense of depth and personality to something at risk of becoming faceless. It's the narration and the scope implied by the mission debriefings that do the heavy lifting. You have to remember, this was before games were really capable of mind-bending visuals, and the power of imagination had a tangible effect on players, especially young ones. So Turalian creating a fortress in the face of incredible enemy resistance must have felt nothing short of legendary. The Alliance teaming up with the Laughing Skull clan to wreak havoc on their mutual enemy must have been legitimately compelling drama, even if you're just controlling human heroes and orc units. Punishing the Bone Chewer and Stormreaver clans for disagreeing with Ner'zhul's vision for the Horde probably felt villainous, dictatorial. It's just a little hard to see that nowadays. Warcraft 2 is challenging to write about. While it established the expectations for RTS games going forward, it was only beginning to fully solidify. Additional campaigns were developed by WizardWorks entirely independently and authorized for distribution by Blizzard. These were add-on discs you could purchase at retail stores. Yeah, as small or as flat as the game appears. Warcraft mattered a lot. And increasingly, Warcraft mattered to a community of players who sprouted up around Blizzard and this specific series. Whatever Warcraft was intended to become, Blizzard would have to navigate its sudden success and helm the ship with care. I can't do that. There was another Warcraft game preceding Warcraft III. Lord of the Clans was a point-and-click adventure game set for a 1998 release. It was made in the style of other similar adventure titles, The Secret of Monkey Island, etc., and was developed by Animation Magic, a subdivision of Capitol who handled the Zelda CDI series of games. Maybe it's not such a surprising cancellation, but apparently Blizzard's issue with the game had less to do with the relative cringe of the trite, cartoonish delivery and specifically took issue with the overall quality. Apparently it was boring and uninspired, enough that they brought a genre expert in to analyze the work before launch and offer criticism. And despite following his advice and even publicly stating that working with the man was a good experience, they shut it down. Maybe they lost confidence that it could carry the implied Blizzard seal of quality. Come on guys, Thrall shreds hella in this one, grow up. The cancellation prompted enough blowback that Blizzard were genuinely surprised. They probably assumed their fans wanted hardcore strategy games and couldn't possibly mind missing out on whatever this is. And it is fairly surprising, because even if the names and places all sound interesting, Warcraft itself was not a fully realized setting. It was cobbled together from what one guy dreamt up one day in a recording booth, built on with words and mostly faceless campaign missions. It'd take till Warcraft III for the studio to properly establish the space. But then, and maybe that's what Lord of the Clans meant to certain fans. It was a chance to meander through this grim, high fantasy setting, maybe meet Grom Hellscream and Terran Gorefiend and get invested.
Zanagagil! Dwarha!
It's just so easy. Despite being cancelled, full long plays of the game exist on YouTube because the prototype version is archived and accessible to people willing to look. Like Blizzard themselves acknowledged, it isn't an incredibly inventive or interesting game. You move and you click. You use whatever you can, whenever you can, to advance. At the very least, it's a decent, if mildly unfitting experience for establishing the player character, Thrall. The whole scenario is dour and serious, but undercuts itself routinely with absurd characters and tone-obliterating comedy that diminishes a potentially Blizzard-quality experience. They were known for being comedic on the side, but the core experience was always played straight. Like, imagine finishing Diablo 2 where they explode a guy for daring to politely ask a demon lord to go away, then playing this the following evening.
I just cast him!
Yeah, it's not convincing. At the same time, Thrall is an important character to Warcraft, quite literally the pivot point for the Orcish race, a new vision for a compelling adversary, not simply driven by demonic madness, but genuine in-universe grievances. Thrall was suspicious of humans because of the way they treated his people. Once stripped of power, they were enslaved and abused by their masters, and that's what Thrall knew about men. It wasn't about good and evil in the abstract sense, it was experience versus experience. The same kind of informing knowledge that makes Admiral Proudmoore a villain in Warcraft III. The kind of thing that drives a person to become someone. And that narrative base is more or less the core of what Warcraft III is as well. A series of interrogations into different people from different perspectives and the way those perspectives fail to fit with others. There is good here, it's just a little hard to see. And it's all a bit small for Thrall. He had to start somewhere, but making him this adventure game goober, more than the spirit-touched person he was, sucks a degree of weight out of the scenario. It's still willing to hit Blizzard hard, but only in rare moments.
I condemn you to living hell for all eternity.
Damn, he actually just condemns two guys to eternal suffering. What the fuck? I think people usually start these things with something epic or inspiring, but the fact is, Warcraft 3 is a bar most games don't ever reach. And it looks like this. And it's an RTS, okay? A genre most people refuse to engage with. These days, anyway. But you have to understand that it's sitting undefeated. Warcraft III launched in July 2002 with the subtitle Reign of Chaos. It massively expanded on the Warcraft concept narratively and mechanically, but also in terms of access. Through its online gateway system, dubbed BattleNet, and with features new to this entry, Warcraft swept across PC gaming culture, inspiring competitive play at a larger scale than its predecessor. Blizzard followed it up just 1 year later with the expansion, Warcraft III: The Frozen Throne, which definitively concluded its story and fully rounded out the experience. So when I say Warcraft III, I mean both the base game and the expansion. Warcraft III is a twofold departure from its past, which makes looking back at the older games so much harder for people who were sucked into the universe by this particular title. It represents Blizzard's first attempt to fully render a game in 3D. And yes, it is ugly. It's boxy and primitive and even comedic. But I'd argue there's worth both aesthetically and even mechanically in these visuals. Nothing else looks like Warcraft 3, not even its own predecessors, and so it's stood the test of time as something entirely its own. By using chunky models with jagged edges and harsh textures alongside exaggerated forms, structures, and weapons, Warcraft 3 looks epic, or like it's trying to capture epic. Many units carry weapons bigger than themselves. Whatever color you're playing as is made stark, visible, and obvious on the field of battle. Thick, lumbering models paired with these other features to make for fairly readable play, even in the midst of massive, chaotic battles. Consider other successful RTS titles of the time, stuff like Age of Empires II. While that game was still fine and parsable, Age of Empires was always focused on historical verisimilitude, and that meant shrinking units to ant-like proportions. And I need the bifocals for this one. Whole armies of faceless fighters battle on fields that pass for realistic but lack flavor and presence, which is exactly what Warcraft 3 was offering. Powerful flavor, palpable presence, even movement. Basic unit pathing is unique to this title. Because units are so large, they're forced to tromp around the battlefield to reposition, often getting body blocked by other units. This is awkward and even frustrating to manage in specific contexts, all depending on the player's ability to micromanage, of course, but what it aesthetically creates is a sense of presence, an import in any given unit. They exist in the world. They take up space. They're thick, and they don't fade into the background like faceless numbers. Even if the unit in question isn't a hero, they're still a felt entity, and that minor mechanical distinction elevates the combat in Warcraft 3 to legendary proportions. This is finally Warcraft. So the very fundamentals of this title set it apart from many others than its predecessors, but even beyond those mechanical realities, 3D environments and physical hitboxes, the system's directing moment-to-moment play were also vastly altered and improved. In a way, Warcraft 3 is 4 different games, or rather, there are 4 different ways to play Warcraft 3. The game has 4 factions instead of 2. Humans, orcs, undead, and night elves. Each of these factions play in profoundly different ways. So different they alter the physical act of playing the game. Where a player would simply build houses to make room for more units in older games, Warcraft 3 asks the player to first consider their chosen race, the specific game flow implied by its unique mechanics, and to craft a game plan around those strengths and limitations. These are just the basics, but humans build their structures, but they can also expend additional resources to make multiple peasants construct a building faster. They're industrious and short-lived, how they're usually represented in fantasy settings. They have the unique ability to ring the town bell as a call to arms, recalling peasants to their home base in the event of an attack, turning peasants into militiamen for a time. No one wants war, but they'll respond when the need arises. They can also have the toughest buildings of all with a certain upgrade because the Alliance, which is partly made of dwarves and other races, has the most advanced technology of any faction. Orcs have burrows instead of farms, which can be defensively manned in the event of an attack, but burrows also have relatively weak armor, rendering them more easily destroyed. Orcs don't have solid infrastructure, something established in the original. In fact, they don't so much reinforce their buildings as jam spikes into them to damage incoming melee attackers. Their units tend to be beefy and hit hard, but also lack armor. They make up for technology with grit. Undead players are simply playing a different game because they're perverse by design, antithetical to life. Cultists summon their buildings into being, and those buildings spread blight, which prevents other races from building on that terrain. They're a creeping sickness. Their units are pretty frail, but regenerate quicker on blighted land. They've got this whole corpse economy that's relevant only to them and a pile of quirky units. They're weird, and they smell. Night elves don't chop trees. They just send wisps to siphon wood off of them, infinitely. They don't harm the land, they live with it. Their units are also fragile, but thankfully the player constantly builds moonwells instead of farms, which can restore health to wounded units. They're focused on preservation. Several of their units take advantage of the night with a stealth function. Most of their structures are actually sentient trees called ancients, which can uproot themselves to move elsewhere or defend themselves. They can fight, but they're playing an entirely different guerrilla-style game in terms of tactics. That's just a sampling of an overview, but I'll get deeper into the mechanics during the campaign discussion. Warcraft III was big news. It was premium when it launched, and even looking how it does, it still feels that way today. It's a game so deep and so rich, you could spend a lifetime mastering every bit of it. And it didn't just ship with factions. No, the real sell was heroes. Apparently, Blizzard took the conceit they stumbled onto during Warcraft II's development, gaining confidence as artists and wanting to make their own thing and tell it the way they wanted regardless of convention. And so heroes were finally freed from campaign exclusivity to join regular play. Heroes are Warcraft III. It's worth noting that this published version is not the game Blizzard initially envisioned. Mike O'Brien, who worked extensively with Blizzard and was leading development on Warcraft III at the time, wanted to make an RTS unlike any other. It was going to be called Warcraft Legends and would feature a kind of RPG-like play that massively departed from the more traditional RTS experience found in Warcraft II and StarCraft. Unfortunately, we have no footage of Warcraft Legends, just different prototype versions of Warcraft III.
Blizzard is betting on graphics that are far superior to most strategy games on the market. With Warcraft III, Blizzard has introduced a new way to play, role-playing strategy or RPS. Players will control small but powerful parties.
They had a lot of ambitions for the game and went through multiple iterations. The Burning Legion was a 5th playable race at one point. Elves might have looked a little different. There was a greater focus on squad combat, a diminished focus on base construction, and a keen interest in fidelity, high-quality models, particle effects, and textures. So that didn't last. It was a totally different game, but the vision was fuzzy and the prototype was unsatisfying, and so they scrapped it outright, and once again used what they had and built something better, from the ground up. Mike O'Brien left Blizzard during this time and ended up designing Guild Wars with a few other ex-Blizzard colleagues. It's unfortunate because Warcraft III was innately risky on its own, threatening to shake the foundations of the studio's then-flagship series, arguably the series that put them on the map. It's a complex, mixed RPG experience. It was innovative, but maybe the vision needed a little refinement. You hear a lot about authors, like the serious authors, writing a draft novel and then rewriting it all from scratch. Tolkien did this, for example, multiple times, and it's part of what made Blizzard so clearly quality-focused at the time. While it's an unfair expectation from most developers, game dev is wildly expensive and multifaceted, and few studios have the ability or safety to start over. The fact that Blizzard did gilded their names in the minds of players. They were that studio. You could trust their output for a time. What Warcraft III ultimately became isn't totally removed from the Warcraft Legends concept. Heroes warp play to such a degree that it's impossible to call Warcraft III a traditional RTS experience. Another experimental RTS game of the time, like Age of Mythology with its god powers and hero units, is still firmly lodged in its roots. You still build bases, control vast armies of faceless soldiers, and wage war. It's all basically recognizable. So here's Warcraft 2 and 3. Yeah, Bit of a jump. The heroes of Warcraft III demanded a different kind of game. Maps weren't just flat spaces with the occasional gold mine interspersed throughout. They were approximations of real places in universe. They had mercenary camps and item shops. They were teeming with monsters, bandits, NPCs you could kill for experience points, and treasure to buff up your heroes. The play suddenly leaned RPG. These environments existed for the heroes, and the heroes elevated the environments. The game wasn't simply orc versus human. Regular matches could tell stories. Night Elves, led by the Demon Hunter X, rapidly overtook the humans and their Paladin Y, all thanks to the artifact the Night Elves found guarded by a rogue mage. It's a different kind of game, but so incredibly forward-thinking for its time, and that's only part of why it's still around. Heroes weren't just big units, they were manifestations of player identity. You could be in a room with 4 different human players and be speaking to 4 different play identities. This guy goes Paladin only. This guy goes Wizard into Dwarf King. This guy dips into the mercenary hero pool but builds a Paladin for backup. This guy plays Blood Mage and loses every damn game. He's a little fucked up. Even if all hero choices were not equal, they were expression, which lent a much-needed warmth and spark to something as clinical as the RTS genre. And maybe it was the wrong call in certain ways. Warcraft II never dared to shift away from its core play with anything as loud and overbearing as hero units, at least in multiplayer. These guys are not optional. You use them or you lose. Warcraft could not be the same ever again. Maybe that's what made it so good. And maybe that's exactly what killed it. People loved heroes, holed themselves up in them, played Dota. Looking over the lineage, it's hardly surprising to me now that Blizzard went on to develop an MMO. They put the player in that very role themselves, in their world, that they spent years crafting. Heroes are bigger and bulkier than most other units, and they glow. Unlike their first iteration in Warcraft II, they can easily be picked out of any battlefield and lend a sense of personality to whatever army. Heroes are a very deliberate attempt to dash uncharitable preconceptions about the genre, how RTS games are flat, devoid of personality, and boring. Heroes come fitted with spells and abilities that you unlock by leveling them up during play. Sure, a lot of them are small, or simple passive traits, but others are game-warping and awe-inspiring. You have not played Warcraft until you've dropped an Infernal onto an enemy army, stunning everyone and spawning a gigantic fell flame animated rock golem. It's hard to overstate how much of a jump this is from the previous game. Warcraft II had heroes and magic, but nothing even close to what its sequel would end up doing. And I should clarify that heroes aren't the entirety of the gameplay. It's completely possible to get tower rushed to death before heroes ever enter play. They're gated behind a specific building, and while they can be revived, still need to be managed carefully. It's very common for one player to surround another with multiple small units, thanks to unit size and body blocking, and beat them to death for a huge swing in tempo. Actually, that's the thing. Heroes aren't all of the play, but all of the play is centered on them. Because they represent so much power and utility, it's crushing to lose one, even temporarily, which means you have to aggressively micromanage them. Your attention is constantly split between building your home base, producing soldiers, and farming experience and items out on the map. You're still engaging with 2 dimensions of play. Not unlike Warcraft II and its naval component, it's just that both dimensions have meaningful crossover now, are meaningfully integrated with one another. And they're actually fun. You don't spend time staring at your base and letting time pass, you're always engaged. These are just the game's bones, though, and what people really latched onto was the story. It was the first time players could immerse in the world of Warcraft. While I've covered games a long time and had to change the way I think about them, Warcraft III remains in my personal list of absolute top-shelf experiences for what it does with its story and mechanics. Warcraft, Orcs and Humans was almost unconcerned with story, or at least in taking the reins and crafting it with intention. Warcraft II took leaps and bounds, and particularly in the Dark Portal expansion with hero units, but it took until Warcraft III for the series to tell a story that's genuinely enhanced by its medium, which is again another facet of why it's endured so long and endeared so many people. It's simply one of the greatest stories ever told through a computer game, and a lot of the time, the hows and whys are ignored. So many videos aiming to look retrospectively at Warcraft III do so by retelling the events of every single mission in sequence, instead of highlighting what the story beats aim to accomplish and how the play establishes and elevates those moments. Blizzard even went as far as ordering the delivery of the plot to tell a better story and take players through the game's factions and mechanics in a way that's both mechanically educational and narratively satisfying. I'm about to highlight the missions of every campaign, not to fully explain their events, but to emphasize what they do well, the ways they're built with intention, and how they materialize the world and the story through play. It's worth mentioning that there's a prelude bonus campaign, basically the beginning of Thrall's story. It's mostly a tutorial segment and was actually longer, featuring 5 full missions in the demo version of the game, but most were cut, probably to tell a better story, faster. It's an important little piece though, because while you rescue Grom Hellscream from captivity, just like you do in Warcraft II, you aren't recruiting him for the sake of onboarding a ruthless killer, but for preserving life. From the very beginning of the campaign, the game is interested in interrogating what Warcraft is and challenging preconceptions. Thrall takes the advice of the mysterious prophet, sensing that he's telling the truth about his people's future with the help of the spirits, and the orcs shove off for Kalimdor across the sea. To highlight that orcs and humans are different, but from an entirely new angle, we pan into humanity's seat of power. While the king stews in his own kingdom's political doldrums, the prophet who warned the orcs drops in and rambles incoherently about the destruction of human civilization. King Taranis can't commune with the spirits, and because he's impossible to understand, he's sent away. And we cut to the king's son, Arthas. Don't make fun of my son. His shoulder pads represent the weight of his burden. Arthas is a paladin, and the human campaign's lead character. The game illustrates hard-earned lessons from Warcraft II in its first chapter. RTS campaign missions don't have to illustrate the core play. Maybe they shouldn't. The game wants players to get excited, and so it leads with something not unlike the dungeon crawls of Warcraft I and Alaria's journey in the sequel. You lead Arthas through the countryside, helping its people with local threats, illustrating that Arthas can fight and that the player can rely on their hero. Arthas can heal or protect other units, even taking a beating in their place, and so he's innately reliable, someone you lean on and even identify with. After all, he wants to help people, and that means killing monsters. You want to kill monsters, and that means helping people and getting stronger. You're rewarded for playing this RTS in ways other RTS games weren't really keyed into. There's a narrative component intrinsically baked into basic gameplay. The second mission sees Arthas join up with his old mentor, Lord Uther, straight out of Warcraft II. This is the game's proper play tutorial, and it takes its time by forcing the player to build houses first, making room for more peasants and more soldiers. Uther's really strong, already sitting at the max level, and patrols the 2 entrances into your base. Nothing the enemy sends at you can realistically break through, especially if you rush to assist Uther, and so you're free to build at your leisure and scout the surrounding environment. You're shown that you're meant to be exploring, that is, engaging with the second dimension of Warcraft III's play, creeping, or killing monsters for items and experience. Now, while you can take out the nearby orc encampment with a large enough force and stop the attacks completely, players will probably wander to the right first and meet with some dwarves. You take out a dragon for them with your new rifleman unit lent to you by the dwarves, and suddenly you've got a magical fire orb that only Arthas can carry. Monsters can drop powerful rewards, but more importantly, Arthas can achieve great things without Uther. He's a kind man and a good teacher, but he's stern, even overbearing for the young prince.
If we allow our passions to turn to bloodlust, we will become as vile as the orcs.
But Arthas is given no reason to humble himself. He successfully uproots all the bandits around Strombrad, takes out the gnolls, kills children, even slays a dragon with the help of his men, and very possibly without a single casualty if the player is healing their units. You're made to feel very powerful, and only face meaningful resistance from the boss, an orc blade master who rips through your men like butter. But no matter how that encounter goes, he can't hope to stop Arthas. You can invalidate his big whirlwind move, his ultimate, with your regular shield ability. This is Arthas' land, and you feel it. You'll meet up with his childhood friend Jaina Proudmourne, a mage, soon after. Jaina is indispensable as an ally. Her water elemental can tank enemy units, because you can always summon another one. And coupled with Arthas' shield, you can beat down nearly any enemy force you come across without really endangering your soldiers. You learn to preserve life with mechanics and have multiple avenues to do so. Losing them to the Blade Master's whirlwind is kind of traumatizing and quick. You recruited soldiers from Strombrad in the very first mission, people with homes and families, so most players will feel incentivized to protect who they can. It's also significant that Jaina summons the strongest human faction unit from Warcraft I by the third chapter of Warcraft III. The world is bigger, more dangerous, and you wield greater strength than ever before. Whether you like her or her personality, she's irreplaceable. It's stated loud and clear in your own mechanical relationship with the character. This mission also introduces the Undead, a new faction to the universe. While Necromancy and the Undead featured in both of the previous games, it wasn't a proper organized force. The complication is, Ner'zhul, the war chief of the Orcs on Draenor in Warcraft II, was made into the Lich King between the end of the Second War and the beginning of this game. Ner'zhul, as the Lich King, extends his influence across Azeroth through his many minions, all of whom ultimately serve the game's true villains. Arthas hunts the ringleader of the regional undead threat, Kel'Thuzad, through missions 3 and 4. You're only able to build a base and battle them directly in mission 4 once the threat is established and a clash is imminent. I appreciate the restraint. So many of Warcraft 2's missions are a total drag to slog through because they demand a full or partial base construction with a paltry lore scroll, lending only the tiniest bit of context to any conflict. Here, armies are colliding on the battlefield. Powerful magic-wielding heroes battle for the fate of nations. It's only really possible with heroes, but enhanced by smaller elements. Cutscenes, voice dialogue, side quests, treasure. This premium delivery and the RPG craft texture the experience so you don't just hear it, but feel it. Chapter 4 is interesting because any player is chomping at the bit to kill Kel'Thuzad, but it's actually his intention to die by your hand. The game teases you with a chase through Mission 3 and taunting dialogue, and even shows Lil Timmy from Strombrad transformed into an undead ghoul. You want to rip Kel'Thuzad apart. He's not challenging to beat either. Undead units take damage from healing magic, so you can zap him dead with a simple heal spell. It's too easy. Mechanically, this means Arthas is carelessly plowing forward while the player might already understand that he's walking into a trap. By Mission 5, Arthas knows the land is at risk of total infection. Kel'Thuzad ensured that tainted grain was distributed between towns by targeting granaries, and he states that a demon named Mal'Ganis is planning to spread the plague throughout the city of Stratholme himself. Before they can make any headway, though, the undead besiege the nearby Hearthglen. Arthas sends Jaina to enlist Uther's aid and handles the threat alone. You've come this far, so surely you can handle it. And you can, but it's a struggle. The player knows that there's a whole map to explore, but they might be afraid of pushing their luck. Still, they've also learned to rely on Arthas. It's just, Jaina isn't here. The player fully steps into Arthas. They're made to strategically fortify their base, scout the lands beyond the trees like they did with Uther, and even run into a severely challenging fight to the northwest if they push their luck. It's a notorious little mission because of this one wrinkle. Why would Blizzard put something so brutal here? And the answer is, regardless of whether it qualifies as good or fair design, the rest of the campaign has been a little too easy, and Arthas is on his own. He needs to struggle and to meaningfully feel the weight of the threat his land faces. He needs to understand it better than anybody for the next mission. And he also needs to fail. Uther arrives just as the city is overrun, beating back the undead scourge and saving the day. And so Arthas, who did all that heavy lifting, gets to feel the sting of his mentor's criticism.
Good lad. If I hadn't arrived...
Yeah, well, maybe if I was level 10...
What?
It doesn't matter how much he does. He isn't respected yet. Not really. Arthas, who uprooted the bandits, killed the dragon, beat back the undead, kept his men alive, slew Kel'Thuzad, and is next in line to rule the land, has a bit of an ego. Arthas is met by the Prophet in an interlude who warns him that Lordaeron is already lost, which is true, even if it's not necessarily how the player expects. Its towns are running rampant with the undead plague. He tells Arthas to take his people west, across the sea, but Arthas stands his ground. He's the crown prince. He can't abandon his people, just like King Taranis. Arthas has no intention of leaving his responsibilities. He's too deeply entrenched in this conflict and, unlike Thrall, can't hear the spirits, can't see the bigger picture with his laser focus. Chapter 6 is infamous, mostly for inciting irrelevant debate. People get caught up on whether or not Arthas is, morally justified, or something for hunting down and slaughtering his own people. People who are infected already, to be clear. But the mission isn't really about whether he's morally justified. Rather, the mission is a billboard-sized take on the very real experience of only having bad options left.
This entire city must be purged. How can you even consider that? There's got to be some other way.
Arthas could abandon his people to their fate and sail away, but he'd be called a coward and a traitor by those who couldn't save themselves, and those he couldn't bring. And he'd leave behind everything he knew, his crown, the land, everything, all of it. Or he could stand and try to save his people the kind way, without killing them, and eventually fall to the endless waves of undead, a wasted life. Or he could do what he does here, by trying to do as much as he can with what little time he has, using the skills he has. He acts without hesitation, and players are rewarded for thinking like Arthas might here. You win this mission by killing a number of infected citizens faster than Mal'Ganis can, who has no reason to kill them in the first place. He's already infected them. I mean, he says something about taking their souls, but whatever. On the face of it, he's already won. But the Lich King has greater designs, and he goads Arthas into debasing himself, turns him into a blood-hungry killer. You can't just kill the citizens faster, you've got to stop Mal'Ganis. So you do. You're granted the precious seconds necessary to pull ahead and win the mission by hunting and killing Mal'Ganis as many times as he regenerates. You're even given the brief chance, after breaking any individual house, to manually target the otherwise untargetable citizens and kill them, the same way you would have learned to kill, children earlier on for fun, before they transform into the undead. You need those seconds, or feel like you do. You can kill them before they're a danger. You can protect your men. You're incentivized to. By the end, you, Arthas, is so stuffed with hate, he's willing to kill at a glance, reduce human life to mechanics that you palpably understand. And because he's killing humans who eventually become the undead, the mission blurs the line between Arthas taking undead life and human life. The campaign resonated with people for a reason. It's an impactful experience, one that you mechanically inhabit, and it's genuinely enhanced by the string of missions leading up to it. In the interim, Jaina is warned by the Prophet. Of course, she could sense his latent magical power and believes him. While she gathers an expedition behind the scenes, Arthas sails north to hunt Mal'Ganis. He's almost inhuman by the time he steps foot in Northrend. His own people are worried about him, and he has no more allies, not really. He's taken the human fleet to hunt a single demon for revenge, while his kingdom burns. Here, he meets an old teacher, Muradin Bronzebeard. When Warcraft III launched, each faction had 3 different hero units, and so the Reign of Chaos campaign partially exists to showcase these heroes and their associated factions. But the context is brilliant. Arthas is out of friends, and he suddenly stumbles across an old acquaintance who can help carry him along, someone who doesn't fully understand the situation. Arthas isn't completely without hope. It's dramatic. Maybe he'll turn around, and we're about to watch him ruin it all again. While you manage to torch Mal'Ganis' base, he eludes capture, and as this occurs, Uther has your fleet recalled, meaning your soldiers are about to sail back home. So Arthas does what any reasonable leader would do in this situation. Without soldiers or the ability to build a base, the player is made to crawl through another dungeon-esque segment on a timer, recruiting local mercenaries, ice trolls, ogres, etc., along the way to cut a path to the ships and sink them one by one. In the end, he pins the sinking of the ships on his assembled multi-ethnic, non-human mercenary force, and it works. They're slaughtered by your men. To achieve his goals, Arthas is willing to burn everyone up around him, and the player is held hostage the entire time. We know what's coming to Muradin, but we have to see. This is the first campaign of 4, of 8 if we're including the expansion. Where in Sam Hill can this possibly go? This is brutal! In the final chapter of the human campaign, Arthas defends his base from Mal'Ganis' undead on multiple fronts and hunts for the legendary sword Frostmourne to gain the power to truly end Mal'Ganis, who simply regenerated previously. He finds the blade, crushes its defenders, and it awakens, killing Muradin in the process, binds to him. A final price paid for the ultimate power, the last shred of his humanity.
Bro mic dropped the death of his soul with a warhammer. It's simply the pinnacle of gaming.
Arthas storms the battlefield stronger than anyone else, finally, and runs Mal'Ganis through. He was a pawn who served the Lich King faithfully, only to be discarded by his Dark Master so Arthas can take his place. This is what the pursuit of power looks like, and why the Orcs could not truly succeed. They needed to band together, in a real way, not purely for the sake of strength. It's one of Arthas' flaws that catches Ner'zhul's eye. It just needed to be coaxed out. I adore the human campaign for a lot of reasons, but mostly for doing something genuinely interesting with the kingdoms of men and their representational character. People like to whinge and moan about orcs going from the evilest beings that ever drew breath into a proud shamanic people. But they forget that Warcraft humans were more or less the most boring collective ever conceived. Warcraft only really had any juice because of the orcs to begin with. Fucking soul armor, man. And the human campaign was made better by flipping the script, taking a righteous person and demolishing him completely, turning him into the most heinous, detestable scumbag alive. Warcraft III always tries to challenge preconceptions, even ones its own base game established, and uses that trick to create compelling drama.
What is this? What are you doing, my son?
Succeeding you, father.
Arthas becomes the Lich King's champion and rules over the undead. And what does Blizzard do with this momentum? Shoves you right back into his shoes and tells you to tear apart your entire kingdom, the one you were saving, the one you did side quests in. But before you're fully given the reins, you have to assemble the members of the Cult of the Damned in this small region, by creeping in shadows and avoiding direct conflict. Arthas is still adjusting to his undeadhood, but more than that, Arthas is a servant of the Burning Legion via affiliation with the undead, so he does this task at the behest of Tichondrius, takes orders. For all his power, he only managed to wind up subservient. Stratholme for a middle management position. Killing other humans should feel perverse, especially coming off the previous campaign, but you've already been groomed into treating it as a matter of survival. It's really only second nature. You're invited to not reflect on your bloodshed and keep moving forward. It's the only way you'll see the story to its conclusion. Your ghouls are weak and you don't really care if they live. You just need them to deal damage. Through a simple change of context, the whole Paladin Protector dynamic is flipped on its head. You're a Death Knight now, you have minions, not men. And you manage them as you see fit. You only have to heal them, like you would have so readily before, because your masters demand it. You're allowed to take control for real in the second mission. The undead faction plays very differently than the humans, and it has implications for the narrative, where before you built up structures the honest way, with peasant labor.
Whoa, what?
Here, a single one of your cultists simply summons them into being, so you can attend to the wider world without having to manage your bases thoroughly, as though the game's mechanics are now beneath you. It's small mechanical changes like this that bring these characters and their reality to life. Arthas isn't guarded by armored footmen anymore, but fragile ghouls. He doesn't command the same kind of respect. Now it's mostly fear, and his army reflects that dynamic. Ghouls are actually gatherers, for lumber anyway, showing that he uses his men, who he, the player, once fought so hard to protect, like beasts of burden. He's a slave driver or a taskmaster now. He's primarily concerned with power. But the game doesn't toss out everything you've learned. Arthas can still heal his units with Death Coil the same way the heal spell worked, but it can also nuke enemy life totals, meaning he's always torn between saving one of his units or simply killing faster. Arthas' humanity might be there, frozen in ice or otherwise, and that inner conflict manifests in a single spell. Regardless, Arthas rips through the countryside, ferrying the corpse of the cult's previous leader, killing off members of his old paladin order, and eventually squaring off with Uther.
Your father ruled this land for 70 years, and you've ground it to dust in a matter of days.
Very dramatic, Uther.
And all of this for his father's urn, which he'll use to preserve Kel'Thuzad's remains, a person he should despise. But he's fallen so far, or become so enthralled, he's willing to unmake every sacred part of his former self. Kel'Thuzad's ghost appears and warns Arthas not to trust Tichondrius. It would be disappointing if you only played a slave for the entire campaign, so Warcraft textures the events with internal drama, right after you've been reduced to middle management and made to undo yourself. It turns out that Ner'zhul, despite becoming a servant of the Burning Legion, still rails against his fate and seeks freedom. and therefore the independence of the Scourge in general. It's an interesting dynamic. Ner'zhul, Kel'Thuzad, Arthas, none of these people have anything left. No family ties or community, not even within the Scourge. But because the Scourge was designed by the Burning Legion to destroy Azeroth, it's implied that even villains, ones who've got absolutely nothing to protect, will still try to preserve their power, or at the very least, their identity. I can truncate the middle of the Undead campaign. You play 3 total missions across Elven territory to crush their armies and seize their Sunwell, a font of magic that can help resurrect Kel'Thuzad. The goal is clear, but the task itself is enormous. The Undead campaign is 1 mission shorter than the previous one, but wants to illustrate the downfall of an entire civilization, so it breaks the events of this region into 3 separate missions, across 3 sprawling maps, which does a good job of turning your time in the Elven lands into an epic slog. The Undead Plague is seemingly unstoppable, and it's even communicated through mechanics. As you build your bases, your buildings create blight, which grows over time like mold. By the end of any given mission, you've blighted whole regions of the Elflands and made plain the physical reality of your corrupting influence. It's brilliant, and so much of it is context. If the Orcs were in the Undead's shoes, they'd topple buildings and slaughter innocents, and that's it. The scenario is elevated by the faction's fundamental mechanics. And this goes for the land and its people. It's not a free tromp and stomp. You have to wrangle the woods themselves, quite literally knock them down with your siege engines to clear a path to victory. In the second of these missions, the land itself is divided by uncrossable rivers that force the undead to use goblin zeppelins or heavily guarded teleporters to collect a series of keys to unlock a magically sealed gate. Your life is not made easy. You're on the enemy's turf and you have to play their game. Regardless of AI competence, it manages to simulate spirited resistance by making you jump through progressively irritating hoops. You might have fun in the first mission, building up a critical mass of skeletons and stomping all over the elves, but the Dragonhawk riders you face afterwards will openly target your necromancers first and shoot them down quickly. You're suddenly forced to decide how you're going to counter enemy flyers, which can be handled with gargoyles or your crypt fiends. Since they can attack from anywhere at any time, you'll want common members of your infantry to be able to handle them as well. So you have to research the web ability for your crypt fiends to drag them down for a beating, at least if you want to be efficient. Tactics, outmaneuvering, countering become more necessary here than in the human campaign. And since this is supposed to be framed as this inevitable march towards victory, it makes your struggle palpable. I also need to highlight item management here. In the human campaign, you get an optional fire orb very quickly and rack up a series of powerful, stat-boosting items over the course of the run. You're made into a really convincing hero partly because of the items. In the Undead campaign, however, your inventory space is frequently challenged by having to carry your father's ashes, which confers no benefits, literally making you haul your shame in a jar. And by the midpoint of the Elven chapters, you need to combine a series of keys into one item to complete the mission. That leaves 4 open inventory slots for other stat-boosting magic items you can carry into the next mission. You don't get to rise to the same power right away as your previous self. Arguably never, because Death Knights simply aren't as combat competent in melee range as paladins. Just when you need magic items, when you're supposed to be powerful, you're denied. Because Arthas can't go back to his old self, and because Arthas is under the thumb of the Burning Legion. And all told, with JPEGs. You're also frequently attacked throughout these chapters by an elven ranger named Sylvanas. She's the strongest resistance you face, and when she's finally routed, Arthas doesn't kill her, but twists her into an undead banshee by ripping out her soul, condemning her to a life of eternal torment. So much of the game feels so epic because people aren't simply discarded. They suffer, visibly. And usually they don't deserve it. It's implied that Arthas was groomed into this role by the Lich King because only he was both powerful enough and cruel enough. You gain access to Banshee units after this and can use them to possess enemies, turning them into puppets that fight against their people. You corrupt everything you touch in so many ways. It's compelling for being so profoundly evil. The land, its citizens, they couldn't just let the good guys do all the evil in the first campaign, right? Ultimately, you torch Quel'Thalas and resurrect Kel'Thuzad as a Lich, finally giving you a pair of heroes to work with, even if it's hard to really call either of them allies. Like, they are explicitly allies, I just mean... They've got history. I appreciate that the villains aren't treated as entirely monolithic or flat. The orcs once served the Legion as well, but they failed to destroy the humans and fell out of favor. And still, many of them cling to their servitor status because they have nothing else. You, as the new and improved threat to life on Azeroth, wipe them all out, and purely to access a gate to communicate with the Legion directly. Of course, that means destroying their bases, building over them, and blighting the land. You're just that much more efficient. And it's painted all over the map. The penultimate undead mission sees you penetrating the wizard city Dalaran. They've erected magical zones that harm the undead, so you've got to build up an enormous force and rush through, tearing apart their infrastructure on a strict timer, however long any given unit's life lasts. Ghouls will simply wither away. You need mechanical meat wagons or beefy abominations to safely traverse from healing fountain to healing fountain facing enemy resistance, slaughtering the various archmagi who stand against you. Everything you do is heavily resisted, or at least narratively. From the Elflands to Dalaran, you can cheese this mission by bum-rushing through with Arthas and nuking the final boss, but if you play it how it was intended, the weight and scale of the conflict are experienced more loudly than even the human campaign. In the final mission, you defend Kel'Thuzad as he summons your Lord Archimonde into the material realm. It's the first time you've been on defense since the human campaign. You have to mass towers and place mines and tap into the Burning Legion's forces to pull through at all, and even then just barely. The kingdoms of men aren't so easily defeated. If only Arthas hadn't been swayed. It feels like maybe things would have been different, like the plague wasn't entirely inevitable. Arthas has moved so far from protecting his homeland to actively aiding its demise, we don't see him reflect on his past or show any kind of remorse. He doesn't even think about Jaina. If anything, he's become husk-like, and we're left to imagine what's going on inside of him, if there's anything left at all. By the end of the chapter, Archimonde, the Demon Lord, uses his magic to topple Dalaran from afar. It's so striking because it doesn't involve explosions or raining fire, just simple strokes of the finger through sand to write the destruction of Dalaran into history's pages. As though the Burning Legion are so above mortal existence, they barely have to engage to rewrite their future. The Orc campaign is a far cry from the first two. Orcs made Warcraft, and they only got a brief highlight in the tutorial. Arthas got 2 full campaigns of agonizing drama. There, orcs only show up as slavers, incompetent members of the Burning Legion, monsters. How they're perceived by others is represented via reduction. They can't be anything more because they're never cast as anything greater. It takes Thrall and his campaign to add nuance to the orc story. Orcs were disgusting, vile creatures in the past, and especially in 1 where everything they were was framed in the negative. But they were also part of the Burning Legion. They were enthralled. They physically turned green because of demonic influence and fell to corruption, even if a lot of that context was filled in later. Thrall isn't some namby-pamby plea for players to look at orcs differently. He's a direct challenge to a very boring and very old way of thinking. This is 20 years before the entire debacle around inherently evil races in Dungeons & Dragons, and people loved Thrall, to be clear. The weight of his role is felt in every step of his journey. Thrall exists to interrogate orchood, the way Arthas exists to interrogate mankind. Orcs are vaguely similar to humans in terms of playstyle, because they actually construct their buildings and use peons, not unlike peasants. But the key thing Thrall, or the player, has to manage early on is a lack of healing. See, you were given healing on your main hero through the first 2 entire campaigns, which gave you a very simple way to protect your soldiers. Lack of player skill at micromanagement was forgiven, and especially in the human campaign because you could fully resurrect fallen units after a point. Thrall has nothing. He can zap enemies, or see far, or summon wolves. The wolves can take damage for his men, but don't last forever. Cost a lot of mana. He doesn't have very much. And that's it. After 2 full campaigns, you're finally forced to play tactically, just like Warcraft 1, and especially in this first mission, carefully minding your soldiers' health and moving them away from danger when necessary. Most orc units are bulky, but if you can't heal them, they're bound to die. You do get access to healing wards, little consumable trinkets you place on the ground that heal in a small area for a brief time, but it's only a band-aid solution. You feel the responsibility, the weight of every lost soldier. This is what it means to be war chief, to have no home and a need to protect your people. you suddenly sympathize with the plight of the orcs, and it's entirely conveyed through mechanics. A shift in play that could only hit this hard after 2 full campaigns. You meet Karen Bloodhoof, leader of the Tauren race, an indigenous species that appreciates your skill in battle in Thrall's particular situation, searching for a new start in another land. The orcs don't know this place, and that unfamiliarity is also replicated in mechanics, that you're denied from building a base for the first 2 missions, that you can't heal yourself consistently and use healing wells and have to scrape to survive. But you have to help the Tauren to make them allies, instead of conquering them. You lead his caravan through a dangerous road that serves to highlight the many threats native to the untamed Kalimdor. You're forced to rely on the land by visiting oases along the way. The orcs have a lot to atone for as a species. They're responsible for multiple wars with the humans. They've only brought suffering to this world. And so even if it isn't Thrall's individual actions that engendered the way people perceive orcs, his life is spent in service to undoing it. The game world's hostile nature only hammers home the heft of his quest. But the orcs are threatened by more than wildlife. The Legion still has its designs and intends to reclaim their servants before they find their freedom. Chapter 3 is one of the best by far for establishing the inner orcish conflict. With contrast, orcs still suffer from their blood-hungry nature, a lingering side effect from drinking the tainted blood of Manaroth.
Excuse me.
That curse is made manifest in Grom Hellscream. He's an older orc, a veteran of the Second War, and set in his ways. As you try to establish a base camp, you find yourself surrounded by human settlements. Grom will constantly rally his men and attack these outposts, directly disobeying Thrall's instructions. You're dragged into conflict whether you like it or not. Thrall is forced to lead, forced to choose between his love for his longtime friend and the betterment of his people. By the end, Thrall sends Grom away to the forests of Ashenvale to chop lumber. It's a humiliating punishment, but tactically necessary. Grom is only really capable of swinging his axe. That's what made him valuable to orc society, which for so long valued strength above all else. In this 4th mission, the player is stuck in a tiny ring of trees and forced to harvest wood. You're cramped, deliberately hamstrung. Thrall can't have you doing anything interesting, only your camp is surrounded by glowing wisps, which you can attack to disperse. You learn after a time that the map is much larger and that you've accidentally encroached on elven territory. They mount a stiff resistance, but your goal never changes. You win the mission with lumber, not with bloodshed. You can uproot every elven base at your own discretion, but it's never a requirement. The player is asked to choose whether they believe in Thrall's way or Grom's, or a compromise, and entirely without judgment. Either way, you'll break through the ring of trees you start in before long, and raiding parties will flood in regardless. Grom, like any fun character in the game, is only given bad options. Disobey Thrall, but warn him of the elves, something deeply unsatisfying for such a storied warrior, or kill the elves and harvest the lumber at the same time, which Thrall won't like either way. The elves will forcibly push you out if you don't defend yourself, and you're made to understand the complexity of the issue. Grom is violent and heavy-handed, but his way is sometimes necessary, and to thrive in Kalimdor, the orcs will have to find an identity in the middle of these 2 methods. Of course, the reason Thrall is reserved isn't because he's weak, but because he fears for the stability of his people, something Uther recognized in Stratholme and something Grom short-sightedly fails to acknowledge. You can't step back over some thresholds. Grom's incursion awakens Cenarius, a nigh-invincible demigod of nature, and the orcs are put on the defensive as he ravages their outpost and jeopardizes the entire operation. But Manaroth, the demon who first tempted the orcs so long ago, spills his blood into a fountain which the orcs find and drink out of desperation. The player is forced to barely pull through increasingly devastating attacks as they traipse up the side and top of the map for this well containing the demon's blood, but once they drink, you're free to stomp all over the Night Elves with impunity. The mechanical reality of this mission does a good job of realizing the situation. Grom is caught between what he knows and what Thrall expects of him, but no matter how proficient you are as an orc player, no matter how much lumber you chop or how many soldiers you recruit, you can't overcome Grom's nature, or demigods, with willpower alone. And so you have to rely on the demons to turn the tides. It's an acknowledgement that while Thrall wants something better for the orcs, it won't come without immense struggle. It goes beyond perception, cutting to the very core of orcish being in-universe. Back with Thrall, the orcs and Tauren work together to beat the encroaching humans back. Whether or not they're led by Jaina, the humans didn't earn the respect of the Tauren or do anything other than setting up shop and claiming what land they could. That's why you gain access to native wyverns here and drive back the technologically advanced humans with Kalimdor's denizens. The orcs were integrating with this space, finding a new home, not treating it as a tourist destination, but a land worth fighting for. Finally, the Orc campaign gives the player a break with a dungeon segment. Here, you follow the humans into an ancient cavern. It's worth pointing out that the Horde's 2 Orcish heroes are never featured as controllable in the same mission. The way Arthas teams up with Jaina and Muradin at different points and forces Sylvanas to work alongside him in the Undead campaign. The Horde is splintered intentionally. The old must give way to the new. You play as either attitude of the Orcs, as represented by whichever Orcish hero you control in those missions, but only one can survive for the sake of the world's future. You actually control 2 separate groups in this mission, Thrall's Orcs and Karen's Tauren. This is important for at least highlighting that these groups can work together independently on challenging tasks. It's a small thing, but remember, in the old days, the humans were simply working with the elves and the orcs were simply working with the ogres, goblins, etc., with no real explanation or exhibition establishing their ability to work as a team. The chase culminates with Medivh stopping the orcs and humans from fighting so that either side will team up and face their real enemy, the Burning Legion, who've already dug their claws into Grom's men. Only one attitude can survive. In the final mission, Thrall and Grom battle for the future of the orcs and Kalimdor. Grom is already too far gone, and Thrall has found another way, through allyship with Tauren, even humans. They have very little in common except that they're all people, and that alone is enough to pursue peace. It's an ideal to strive for, and it won't come without casting off the Legion's influence. The mission is challenging. Demons are powerful enemies and usually deal chaos damage, which eats through armor. No man-made fortification is enough to stop the Legion. It takes greater power, greater tactics, or heroes to stand against them. And in a powerful act of empathy, Thrall doesn't try to kill Grom, but to capture his soul in a gem and purify it of demonic influence. Thrall acknowledges what the orcs were, but also wants to heal his people instead of cutting off the infected limb, so to speak. The Orc campaign ends with a final showdown with Manaroth. For all Thrall's efforts, Grom dies, but in killing Manaroth, he secures the Orc's future in his final act of brutality. He did have good in him, he just had to follow his tools, as it were. Some people are just doomed to suffer. It must have been weird if you played the older games, watching Blizzard suddenly decide to interrogate the Orcish identity. Not that they hadn't started with Lord of the Clans, but regardless, for the first time in Warcraft, they stand on the front lines against demons with humans. And it'd be really easy to look at what orcs are and say, well, they can only be one thing, and they should only be one thing, but I think it makes for a much more interesting story. That other attitude, it's the same attitude that the game predicts. It's how orcs are seen before they're controllable. It's how even Jaina, one of the most open-minded characters, reacts to working with orcs. It is infinitely more interesting to add layers and nuance to a group of people with a culture, with bloodlines and traditions, rather than pigeonholing them as savage, irredeemable monsters.
Me, not that kind of orc.
And it's what the game is building towards anyway, an Azeroth that only exists because of the contributions of its disparate peoples, some long established and others trying to find their place. Warcraft III's story can't function without nuanced orcish identity. Identity is so important to this game, narratively, mechanically. It's no wonder people identified with it. Reign of Chaos's final campaign involves the Night Elves, a race entirely unmentioned until partway through the Orcish campaign. They're secretive, secluded, and most of them have been sleeping for millennia until the Orcish incursion demanded action. The Night Elf campaign is the linchpin that ties these loose factions together. They act something like stewards of Azeroth, deeply attached to the land and able to communicate with spirits of all kinds. I appreciate that in the spirit of bucking expectations, the Night Elves aren't just nature-focused, but actually zealous enough to declare the Orcs and Humans sacrilegious by their very nature. Tyrande, High Priestess of the Elves, is actually a warrior as well and attempts to push the invaders out entirely. Of course, she has probable cause. Cenarius is dead because of Grom. The faction is interesting for reasons I delineated earlier, but also because of their core army units. They don't get a proper footman and have archers instead. They're meant to hit and run, use range, stealth, heroes, and the environment to their advantage. They also pair up with hippogriffs in the late game, becoming hippogriff riders. They get stronger after bonding with nature. The Night Elves get up to speed by the second mission. The undead scourge has crossed the sea, and they're the real danger. They're why the Orcs and Humans are working together, even, and why they've come to Kalimdor. Tyrande has to use Shadow Meld, stealth, an innate Night Elf ability to evade enormous demons and rendezvous with her people. For all the elves' knowledge and power, they're still unable to fight the Legion's forces head-on, or too smart to try. They tried in the past and barely scraped by. In the third mission, you awaken the Archdruid Malfurion Stormrage from his hibernation.
What you got there, buddy? Just chewing some peanut butter?
When he awakes, he summons Treants to wipe out the invading undead. The land itself rises at his call to fight this unnatural threat. Heroes are important at every level to every campaign. Tyrande is a warrior first, so she doesn't rely on nature to fight, only on the magic granted to her by Elune, a goddess of the Night Elves. Conversely, Malfurion only relies on nature and has a focus on control and preservation, befitting of the Archdruid of the Elves. I should mention that Tyrande has been the de facto leader of her people for the entire time the Druids have been hibernating. You're working to save your husband, Malfurion Stormrage, in this mission. Tyrande is a fighter and a leader. She trusts herself to make important decisions because she's successfully done so for millennia. This is critical context for the fifth mission that's easy to ignore because of the enormous gulf of time that Malfurion effectively abdicated leadership. It's hard to immediately understand. Tyrande is a woman hardened by the burden of responsibility. Chapter 5 is important for illustrating the severity of the Legion's return. Local creatures have been driven mad by drinking from tainted springs. Demonic creatures and revenants corrupt the forest on the Legion's behalf, and the forces of orcs and men are the only thing actively challenging them. So while Cenarius lies dead because of Grom, and Tyrande can't bring herself to trust these people, the humiliation of working alongside them might be necessary. The corruption runs deep enough that they might not be able to handle things on their own. Which leads to the fifth mission. It's not interesting by itself, a simple dungeon crawl and a tutorial for a second kind of druid, but what it also gives us is context. So much of Warcraft III works because each of its factions have wrinkles, internal drama that challenges viewing them from any one angle. Humans are advanced and virtuous and whatever, but they're also capable of incredible cruelty. The undead are mostly mindless zombies, but some conspire even against their own masters in pursuit of freedom. The orcs are bloodthirsty monsters, but also fully capable of restraint and change. Night Elves are just as nature-reverent as they are warrior-like, and they also have an internal problem. 1,000 years prior, the Burning Legion attacked Azeroth, and it led the Night Elves to develop different means of defending themselves. Demon hunters weaponized the Legion's own magic against them. But this practice led to said demon hunters succumbing to corruption in the mad pursuit of power, and they were locked away, considered sacrilegious, a bridge too far. Enter Illidan's Stormrage, Malfurion's brother and the greatest living demon hunter. Tyrande frees him against her husband's wishes, even striking down his jailers to do so, either because she feels bad for him in some way, or because she genuinely believes he can help. Maybe a bit of both.
It has been an eternity, brother. An eternity spent in darkness.
Damn. He's just like me.
Feeling betrayed by his people, he only chooses to fight for Tyrande's sake, because he loves her. You know, his brother's wife. And so, Illidan goes to prove himself. A character falls from grace in every campaign. Arthas, Sylvanas, Grom, and now Illidan. Not always because of their arrogance or bad nature, but because the world is cruel. Or because of simple flaws. They're all warriors and all fighting for what they believe in. All of them do what they can with what they have, and fall anyway. Before the mission even begins, Illidan clashes with Arthas, who's presumably leading him to his destiny per Ner'zhul's instructions. The undead's machinations run deep, and Illidan's greatest flaw is temptation, something decidedly more human than his eternal contemporaries, and what makes him relatable. Illidan is also really enjoyable to use because the other Night Elf heroes weren't as physically powerful. Tyrande is strong, but mostly for her passive archery boosting aura and her ultimate ability Starfall. Malfurion is useful as a healer and for making soldiers out of trees. Neither of these heroes can really stand up to a strong melee fighter, though, on their own. Illidan is exactly what Tyrande believes him to be. Mechanically, Illidan can stand in the front lines against the demons, burning them alive with his immolation magic, dodging incoming blows, even sapping the mana off enemy casters, and dishing out piles of damage up close. He's a menace, and the strongest person you can stick on your front lines. Illidan successfully tears through the undead scourge and the Burning Legion's demons, but finds the long-lost skull of Gul'dan, and he's tempted towards darkness by the promise of power. Taking the relic in hand, he transforms into a demon himself and gains the power to triumph over his enemies. Maybe he could have taken the slow, honorable path, proven himself fully, but Illidan is addicted to magic and power. Despite the good he's done, his brother casts him out, only sparing his life for serving his people well. Me when I'm a big lumbering idiot. Before the campaign moves to its conclusion, we get a cutscene involving the Prophet, Medivh from Warcraft I, returned from the dead, and the leaders of the assembled factions. Medivh blames himself for the return of the Legion and says it plainly: they need to work together to preserve all life on Azeroth. This leads to the final mission of the base game. Here, Archimonde sends waves of monsters to demolish your defenses while you desperately defend the World Tree, whose death would amount to a total victory for the Burning Legion. This mission is hard, and demands an understanding of all three controllable factions. You're not even supposed to kill Archimonde. You're just meant to delay his advance for 45 real-life minutes, which can be just as excruciating as it sounds, but you put in all this effort to save the world, so what better way to burn Warcraft III into your memory? In the end, the Night Elves sacrificed their eternal life to kill Archimonde for good. It's exactly the kind of bittersweet conclusion the game was building to. In-universe, victories are often earned by paying a terrible price. At the same time, it's a hopeful message. Night Elves are made mortal, dislodged from their privileged position, a part of Azeroth's people. No longer its ageless stewards, above everyone else and capable of sleeping through the world's problems.
So the people of Azeroth come together as one, in spite of their faults and foibles, and ultimately, working towards a common goal becomes their greatest strength. It's not mind-blowing, it's not brilliant, but what it does do is dignify each of the playable races in-game. Except for the Scourge. So you can imagine where the expansion went.
The Frozen Throne expansion shipped with 4 additional campaigns, one for each faction, and this time highlighting different heroes to fully round out the rich universe already established. Since the expansion also handed each faction a new hero unit, those heroes worked their way into every campaign. Almost. The Orcs don't get a proper campaign, per se, and were instead given an experimental bonus campaign that leans RPG, which is maybe fitting anyway. The Reign of Chaos storyline did plenty for the Orcs, and the only lingering question was, would they thrive in Kalimdor? Either way, the Frozen Throne begins with the Night Elves. They got a little shortchanged in the base game with only 6 missions to fully wrap their internal arc and the game as a whole. But that first Night Elf campaign established Illidan, brotherly drama, a love triangle, and even had the High Priestess assault her own people to free a man who would end up becoming a monster. And recognizing how many moving pieces populated their story, the Night Elves got a full series of missions centered, at least spiritually, on Illidan. Illidan kicks off the expansion, summoning Naga from the ocean's depths to serve him, and by extension, the Burning Legion. He took his one chance at freedom and ruined it by falling prey to his nature. While his intentions aren't immediately clear, he's a threat to rival Arthas and worms his way into every campaign of the expansion. But the play doesn't hand us Illidan, and instead gives us his jailer, Maiev. She's more or less Inspector Javert, the person who oversaw Illidan's imprisonment for 1,000 years, and who's entirely fixated on him. Maiev is a Night Elf melee hero, a warden, but not nearly as bulky as Illidan. He was a standout in your army for his unique stats and capabilities. The Demon Hunter paves over the Night Elf melee weakness completely, making creeping a breeze with his skill set. You understand, at least at a gameplay level, why Tyrande would risk so much to set him free. Because Maiev just ain't it. She's a teleporting, knife-tossing assassin that you have to carefully micromanage. She's mana-hungry as well, easily chewing through her bar if you start spamming abilities, meaning you have to intentionally limit your usage. It's a restrained style of play and very prone to overexpenditure, befitting her place in the story. You search for Illidan in the forest, but only find Naga soldiers ravaging towns along the coast, and this is a narrative mission more than a base building mission, so you hunt, which is what Maiev is and what Maiev does. We see that Illidan's very presence is enough to drive forest creatures berserk, which helps illustrate the gravity of his release. Tyrande really believed he deserved a second chance or genuinely wanted to avoid working with Outlanders to handle the Legion, but it wasn't worth the cost. Maiev also rescues her people from captivity, which at least paints her as someone who wants to do the right thing. The second chapter sees Maiev chasing Illidan to a remote string of islands where a ruined temple still stands. This is a location from Warcraft II. It even houses an old warlock and skeletons of the 2 orc clans who occupied the region. If anything, this mission serves to further establish Maiev, representing her as a respected commander, a skilled tracker, and zealous, but very possibly righteous for doing what she does, even willing to help an old tormented soul, and leave him alive even if she doesn't believe he has any right to life for his past affiliations. So many conversations about characters boil down to good and bad, right and wrong, where better analysis would ask if their motivations and actions are in alignment, and how these characters serve the broader narrative. The third mission is a proper dungeon crawl. By now, the player is probably used to Maiev's quirks, teleportation, and careful play, and a dungeon is the perfect place to test those mechanics. The danger of the quest is communicated clearly. If you run out of mana with mismanagement, you're gonna feel it. But you have no proper healing except whatever you find in the dungeon, so every unit lost is a failure. As a leader, as a tactician, even if the player likes Illidan and doesn't like Maiev because she's like, mean or something, they'll at least be able to feel her plight through play. I mentioned that the RPG side of Warcraft III elevates it. In this temple, you can find shards of the Shadow Orb, apparently Gul'dan's favorite relic, which will increase your power for every shard found. But you have to teleport from esoteric angles to find them all. The hunt for the Shadow Orb is a micro-reflection of Maiev's mad pursuit for Illidan, optionally granted to the player. You can roleplay whether Maiev's a powermonger or fully focused. Doing so foreshadows a willingness to do whatever it takes to get the job done, by sidling up to the very forces that Illidan taps into. She optionally worked with the infamous warlock Drakthul in the last chapter regardless of her disgust. She's potentially willing to use the Burning Legion's own magic against them. Not such a far cry from the man she's hunting. Righteousness is too often blind rigidity. Maiev crosses that threshold when the temple starts to crumble. She knows she can teleport away and escape, but she cannot save her soldiers, who respect her, and even her decision to leave them. Maiev is a little zealous, but it goes increasingly further, not unlike Arthas, because she's bound by duty and her own expectations. The temple also serves as additional context regarding the Naga and the Elven Queen who condemned them to their fate. We don't get their full perspective, really at any point, because they aren't privileged with their own campaign. Or rather, they're headed up by Illidan later on, as though they're so lost to history and so twisted they're beyond comprehension. The fourth mission involves guiding a messenger out of the Isles to ask for reinforcements from Malfurion and Tyrande. It's not a particularly mechanically important fight except for highlighting what we already know. Maiev is strong, but not strong enough to take on Illidan and his Naga alone, especially not after dungeon crawling. At the same time, she has to know the Archdruid's wife is responsible for Illidan's freedom, but holds him in high regard. There's a level of desperation in her actions. She's willing to abandon her pride. Your main base is perpetually under attack as you run Maiev through the twisting streams, threatening a game over, but it's nothing the player hasn't handled before. Malfurion and Tyrande join the player again in the fifth mission for a full-scale clash with Illidan and his Naga allies. I appreciate the way Maiev's character is handled because it takes 4 completed missions to access additional heroes, 4 battles, to realize she's in over her head and needs assistance, which she presumably could have acquired at any time. You found a lot of treasure in the dungeon and had to leave some of it behind, items that could have been shared with other hero units, if only you had any to carry them. Just another way Maiev is shown to bite off more than she can chew. It's small, but so much of why the game works comes down to minute patches of texture woven together. Chapter 6 sees Maiev and Tyrande trawling through the remains of Lordaeron, aiding a young elf named Kael'thas as he leads his caravan through the undead masses. Malfurion leaves to commune with nature, and both the priestess and warden despise each other. Maiev hates Illidan and can't believe Tyrande freed him so willingly, slaughtering her people to do so. It's not the kind of thing you casually smooth out. Regardless, they work together for the mission. Lordaeron lies in ruins in the wake of the Scourge, and you have no ability to train more soldiers because you're always moving. You're forced to find caches of gold with Kael's help to spend on mercenaries. It's an easy thing to take for granted, but it shows how scattered and thinly strung the Alliance is. It can't afford backup, can't afford to meaningfully assist its supposed allies because the battle against Archimonde exhausted the 3 factions. The nation's infrastructure lies in shambles, so mercenaries are the only accessible warriors, desperate people looking for gold to survive. The mission ends with Tyrande staving off the undead, but destroying the bridge she's standing on and being carried away downstream. It's one of those unfortunate video game moments that might have looked better in a cutscene because the bones just aren't there. And we don't chase after her. Kael's in no position to make demands, and Maiev's the only remaining leader, so she leaves Tyrande to the undead. And why wouldn't she? To her, it's justice meted out by fate, or Elune herself. The 7th mission, which takes place in the ruins of Dalaran, is a frantic, multi-faction battle between the Night Elves, the Undead, and Illidan's Naga. The land remains blighted by the Scourge, leaving you boxed in. The Undead are more of an incidental threat, apparently left largely directionless after Archimonde's fall. Illidan is busy with the relic he stole from the temple to channel a massive spell. For what, our heroes don't know. This is another battle that doesn't seek to build on Maiev meaningfully, but does manage to elevate the context. Tyrande is apparently lost. The Night Elf army strikes out from a disadvantageous position, fighting on 2 fronts for vague notions like justice and vengeance. They didn't do proper recon. Malfurion is only aware that Illidan is doing something big, so you rip through both forces while shunting attackers. In the aftermath, Illidan states that the spell was aimed at the roof of the world, meant to entirely obliterate the Scourge by striking the Lich King. So that thorn in your side you beat back the whole mission? You've only ensured more of that. Of course, Malfurion acts like most leaders in Universe do. He rebuts with the truth that Illidan hadn't considered the consequences anyway, something echoed by Uther previously and even Malfurion himself at Tyrande. He was right once before, and truly, Illidan is ultimately serving the Burning Legion, even if he's generally unaware that the Lich King and his masters have split, so he's acting as an assassin for a much more powerful and dangerous faction. It's a complicated context that's represented in the general scramble of the mission. Kael lets slip that Tyrande may be alive, and that's how Illidan gets off a second time. Maiev was short-sighted and overly zealous, and it cost her. It's what lies at the heart of Warcraft III's drama. Almost every character could attempt to justify their actions, and as the audience, we're left to parse what we think from what we know. The final Night Elf chapter sees the Blowjob brothers working together on separate halves of the map with their disparate forces, Naga and Night Elf, to rescue Tyrande. Both brothers love her, and her life is worth everything to either of them. She's Malfurion's wife, and the only person who actually believed in Illidan. He owes her. More interesting, the map is physically constructed so that Malfurion and Illidan can never cross to either side, never fully meet. It's not a complicated message. These two are so distant, so fundamentally estranged that they can never meaningfully call themselves brothers again, but they are family. They are capable of aligning their interests. I appreciate the ending because it's challenging, forcing you to engage with 2 halves of one army, both mechanically distinct, and it illustrates that people are more important than ideals. Vengeance and justice and all of that high-minded shit is fine when the stakes aren't high, but in the end, Tyrande is worth saving regardless of her faults. People are worth striving for. Love manifests in different ways, but it's stronger than hate, which is a decent prelude to the human campaign. The Human, or Blood Elf campaign, is a good example of what I meant by Warcraft III intentionally flipping the script whenever possible. You play as Kael'thas, a High Elf mage in service to the Alliance. The only problem is, your commanding officer, Garithos, is openly bigoted and gives you impossible tasks hoping you'll wind up dead.
I trust your elven ears heard them clearly enough.
Keep in mind, this is during a full-scale undead invasion. I don't actually think he's unrealistic at all. I'm just bothered that I can't imagine him, despite how cartoonishly fucking evil he is. This is also the second time a human in power is shown doing deliberately questionable things instead of acting righteously, like they would have written in the past. The writer must have decided that the Alliance got off too cleanly in the first 2 games and wanted to add nuance to their portrayal, which I appreciate not because it goes, look, bigotry bad, but because it acknowledges these inclinations as real facets of the species. Tyrande acted like this as well.
While the game shows us 2 sides of orcish existence, it's also willing to show us the good and bad qualities of everyone on screen, really. And in doing so, it encourages us to think about these diverse peoples complexly, instead of in simple black and white. Only here, the context is deliberately and purposely cruel. Kael successfully seizes control of the area by rooting out bandits and quelling the undead, and with the help of the Naga, who gave him assistance with crossing the lake. It's what makes this campaign so interesting. Yes, Garithos is the worst tactician and an awful person, but Warcraft is full of ridiculous personalities. So now we just want to see where the sopping wet Meow Meow's journey is taking him next. All of your troops are recalled to the front lines with Garithos. You're told to defeat the undead in the surrounding area, but you have no chance of surviving on your own. You're left with nobody to turn to but the Naga, and told that consorting with the Naga is treason.
so you can soar with the Naga. You don't even use your own human armies to truly wipe out the undead. The game acknowledges that you understand human faction gameplay and challenges you to enter Kale. Abandon your faction, even if it takes some time, because the Alliance has turned its back on you. The game illustrates that confusion and grief with mixed mechanics. You have to handle Naga units on a whim. Eventually, Kale is seen working with the Naga and thrown into prison for execution by Garithos. So, stripped of rank and honor for daring to live, you escape with the help of Lady Vash and carve a path through the dungeons. Did you just mulch those guys?
Yes.
No, like,
I came to rescue you.
you turn them inside out. Kale's made to kill his jailer and old friend Kassan, who simply sides with tyranny.
It's a shame to see a good wizard gone bad.
Bro, I'm gonna pull your spine out of your mouth.
If you've been in and around Warcraft 3's community for long enough, you know the kind of jackass who smirks and goes, Garithos did nothing wrong, which is basically code for maybe Hitler had some good ideas. Warcraft 3, in both the Orc story and Kale's path, shows us people left with no choice but perseverance in a cruel world for the sake of survival. It realizes their plights, translates and delivers them with mechanics. It's such an obvious way to communicate that people suffer unjustly all around the world, despite coming from different backgrounds, and we have to bridge the gap to understand them.
But maybe they're right. Maybe Garithos didn't do anything wrong. Maybe being pathologically compromised and impossibly emotional and incapable of thinking in context about other people is actually a strength.
You know it fucking isn't. What are we talking about? Kel'Thuzad's portal remains active, and that's your target. At this point, Kale is ready to abandon the Alliance entirely and find another future for his people. I appreciate how many of Warcraft's stories are ultimately about freedom and dignity, more than anything else. Even the undead. Thrall, Sylvanas, and here as well, people who feel lost or abandoned will always seek belonging, and sometimes it's something you have to carve out for yourself. Raw human truths crunched down into kind of trite fantasy and delivered through blocky humanoid constructs.
I ride on the great winds. I am silent, but deadly.
Dude, chew with your fucking mouth closed. Of course, there's a bonus tower defense mission, the only of its kind, sitting between this dramatic threshold and Outland. So if you wanted to cut the narrative tension for fun, it's right here. The expansion makes a point of varying chapter goals and doing playful or interesting things with their construction to make the experience smoother. In Mission 4, you find Illidan trapped in a cage guarded by Maiev, who's apparently en route to complete her objective. You intercept her entourage and bring Illidan back in an on-rails tug-of-war, something like a mobile King of the Hill mode, facing off against waves of Night Elves. It's extremely easy to use mercenaries and hero abilities while your own armies spawn in behind you, putting a focus on micromanagement and outmaneuvering Maiev with your heroes. She's just that driven and powerful that it takes Kale and Vash to take her down together. The mission also illustrates the entire Illidan issue. He's obviously not to be trusted and clearly corrupted by demonic influence, but he's acting for the good of the world. It's a complicated situation that has no easy answer, so it comes down to strength. Kale finally meets with Illidan, a person whose reputation he knows, but the Demon Hunter is willing to offer Kale's magic-starved people a new source, which is all Kale can ask for. After the Scourge corrupted the Sunwell all the way back in the original Undead campaign, the High Elves were left without a font of magic, which they'd become addicted to, and they'll die otherwise. What I like about Illidan and why he's so analogous to Arthas, though we get to experience less of his journey for ourselves, is that he was denied community, or put into a position where he felt forced to leave his people behind and scrapes out his own existence with his own ability. They aren't happy people. They're not even living contentedly. They're just doing what they can with what they have. Chapter 5 involves hunting down a series of portals and demolishing them to prevent the local demon warlord Magtheridon from receiving reinforcements. You work again with a mixed force against the dregs of the Burning Legion. In case that's confusing, they don't operate as a single unit and have their own designs, and are also willing to let their own kind die if it advances their goals. And you're a pack of outcasts looking for a new home on very settled land. You can't just waltz in and declare yourselves kings without overthrowing the pre-existing empire. These actions pay off in the final mission of the human campaign, toppling Magtheridon's rule in Outland.
He has become decadent and complacent.
It's pretty fascinating seeing the game get as playful as it does with its story. This was sold as the human campaign, but it's really the High Elf campaign, and Illidan's story, the Naga's story. You even team up with a stealthy Draenei assassin named Akama and some of his people, which gives you multiple strike teams to infiltrate this final dungeon with, the Black Citadel, or as WoW players know it, the Black Temple.
You are not prepared! You are prepared!
I clap!
You come from multiple angles and even access different mechanics to take control. Akama's squad needs to sneak through the base, killing specific targets. Kale can banish away enemies, alongside using his sorceress's slow ability to make strong enemy demons weaker for his weaker Blood Elf army to succeed. And Vash attacks from the waterways under the Citadel. It's careful to frame this as a remarkable feat of cunning and unity in the face of impossible odds. Even the outcasts and apparently inhuman can band together and do incredible things. It's part of why I love this game and its messaging so much. People suffer through torturous existences and impossible odds, but continue to find strength in others or in themselves regardless. Of course, that doesn't mean much in the face of the Burning Legion.
Foolish little mongrel.
In the end, you're still rats scurrying for your shelter in a world that has no room for you. Desperation drives every conflict. It makes the entire RTS framework valuable by design. No matter how great your heroes are, they're still only fragments of armies, which are themselves fragments of empires. You're small, except where you can enact change. The final campaign is important because it's the culmination of Arthas' story, arguably the game's main character, and while it takes time establishing other facets of the undead, it needs to wrap up with Arthas anyway. Surely all that suffering meant something, right? Arthas did become King of Lordaeron, but not in a way that matters. He rules over a ruined land with only meager holdouts, the remainders of the paladins and the people they protect, to resist his brutal regime. After running the Dreadlords out of Lordaeron, Arthas splits his forces into 3 groups to seize total control of the region. You inhabit the vicious powermonger Arthas became, lording your strength over the weak for no greater reason than exerting control. Arthas is struck with searing pain inflicted by the Lich King. Illidan is approaching the Frozen Throne and means to destroy Ner'zhul, so Arthas is told to return. Over the course of the campaign, Arthas loses strength as the throne's influence weakens, and so you lose levels mission over mission until you return to the Frozen Throne. It's a humbling experience. Arthas was usually stronger than anyone else at any time, and you came to rely on your heroes in every mission, so here, you're made to rely on others, especially by the end, despite being undead, holding nothing resembling friendship with anybody. This gives the retreated Dreadlords a chance to convene and plot his downfall. Like Uther and Malfurion previously warned, not considering the cost of an action has consequences. The Burning Legion unleashed the Scourge explicitly to destroy the kingdoms of men, but had no intention of setting up a power structure other than rule by fear. Arthas doesn't have total control over all undead. Many of them retain their minds. These are the Forsaken, and they rally under Sylvanas' banner. They're cursed to undeath, a special kind of living torment, and doomed to be perceived as perverse and monstrous until experiencing true death, presumably on the battlefield or by rotting away. For no crime other than being slain and having their corpses reanimated against their will, they despise Arthas and the Burning Legion and hold no allegiance to them. The second mission manifests the strife within the faction. It's easy to imagine the undead as drooling, mindless monsters, but here we have 3 separate factions: Arthas and those who serve the Lich King, the Burning Legion's own undead, and the Forsaken. You flee Lordaeron with Kel'Thuzad at your side, battling through hordes of monsters and touring the results of your actions. Real leaders build. Arthas piled up a mountain of bodies and called it an empire. This ends with Sylvanas' betrayal. She wants him dead, and either way, she aims to overtake Lordaeron as a home for her new people.
Give my regards to Hell, you son of a bitch.
From here, the campaign ping-pongs back and forth between Sylvanas and Arthas, with Sylvanas doing everything in her power to make something of her newfound eternal life and her innate ability, and Arthas doing everything in his withering power to obey and preserve what little he has. I remember being surprised that Sylvanas was named War Chief at one point in a World of Warcraft expansion, and while I can't comment on the efficacy of WoW's story, or rather refuse to, I have to stress that she was a hero in Warcraft III for what she chose to do in spite of her situation. She could have vanished or abdicated responsibility or fallen into despair, left the Forsaken to their own devices, but she acted every time she could. Regardless of the outcome, people of action are significant. Of course, Sylvanas has already accepted her lot in life and has no qualms with possessing ogres and other sentient beings to accomplish her goals. She's not a good person, but efficient, completely aware that she could strive her entire life to live like a saint and would still be painted badly in the history books for being undead. So you exert influence any way you can. Possession, nighttime raids, wheeling and dealing to secure something resembling peace. Sylvanas is a ranger and not very useful in melee range. She serves better as a commander or a tactician, leading from the rear for her forsaken brethren. Her abilities reflect her nature: silence to stop enemy casters, a life-draining spell, and the ability to dominate minds. She's backed up by the Dreadlord Varimathras, once you twist his arm into subservience, who's a decent frontline fighter with a vampiric aura and other magical abilities, notably sleep. You might not have quality healing, but you have a lot of utility, meaning this arm of the undead campaign is characterized by subversive tactical play, befitting a fallen elven ranger using cunning and manipulation to get what she wants. You even managed to dominate Garithos and use him as a melee juggernaut at one point, battering down whatever hapless enemies you come across with armies that aren't even yours. Narratively, it's vile, but knowing everything you know about this world and the fate of people who suffer through it, it's hard to not feel justified securing Lordaeron for Sylvanas. She manipulates Varimathras to put down his own demonic brothers, giving the Legion a taste of their own medicine, and gets exactly what she wants. Aside from the strife, it's almost a happy ending.
Now I want you wretched animals out of my—
Kill him, too.
Gladly.
You can't kill Garithos. He did literally nothing wrong. He was just defending his homeland. No!
Back in Northrend, Arthas is losing power fast, and Kel'Thuzad stayed behind to maintain his forces in Lordaeron. At the same time he's running out of power, he's not so coincidentally running out of allies. The 7th chapter is played out in 3 parts, representing 3 separate maps, not unlike Arthas' march against the elves, but the context is very different. He's stuck on a barren, inhospitable glacier, without soldiers or strength, but he's joined soon after by a Nubarak, a hulking spider-like creature native to Northrend and a servant of the Lich King. He becomes your tank, basically. He can soak up a lot more damage than Arthas at this point, just because of the difference in strength. This 3-map super dungeon has various challenges, treasures, and optional material. At one point, you can rescue some Nerubians to help round out your squad. It almost feels like the old days, like freeing peasants from slavers or rescuing Muradin's dwarves, a distant echo of a younger Arthas. You find treasure as well, like you'd expect, but I love that as Arthas' power wanes, it becomes apparent how much you need those items. Claws of attack, magical orbs, charms, anything at all to keep up, to desperately cling to the power you need to survive. Arthas' arc works so well with the game's core mechanics. He's a hot-blooded but otherwise highly effective warrior, so he learns to trust himself to a point where he's willing to commit atrocities with absolute clarity because his vision is so singular. He's the perfect Warcraft III hero, towering over other units, stocked up with magical artifacts found in levels, things that he earned, and loaded with experience points. How strong can we make him? And when the game starts sucking his strength away, we're left stewing and scrabbling within the cold mechanical realities of the system, coveting treasure and power above all else. This dungeon also features a Lovecraftian kind of enemy, which isn't incredibly interesting or useful, except that Blizzard was laying the foundation for a universe influenced by the dark designs of many impossibly powerful groups. Not such a far cry from its Warhammer inspirations. The Burning Legion is relentless and extra-dimensional, barely opposable. Throwing Cthulhu into the mix sounds like overkill, but it means that these powerful forces can oppose each other and create a kind of cosmic drama, a world of endless war to justify whatever Warcraft would become in the future. The game eventually snaps out of its lore fixation and slaps a timer on the screen. You escape to the surface because you've got a final battle to attend. The finale of Warcraft III takes place between the Undead Scourge and Illidan's army. Ner'zhul restores your powers, and you face off in one of the game's hardest missions, capturing a series of obelisks to access the Frozen Throne before Illidan. Neither the Orcs nor the Night Elves, excluding Illidan, take part in the fight. Not that the story would be better if some contrivance brought them all together, it's just interesting to see a final Warcraft clash with no Orcs. But this is Northrend, far removed from Elven concern, and the Orcs are starting to find their peace. The final battle at the roof of the world comes down to fallen elves and corpses. It's not an incredibly complicated match. You need to knock down Illidan's bases and defend those points to win. What actually happens, though, is seizing one at a time while struggling to maintain all of them at once. Illidan is very powerful, and his units hit hard. Naga are not meaningfully balanced to slot in with the 4 major factions. They never made it to full faction status, and you feel it on the battlefield. It's a frantic fight with roots that go back to the first clash between these characters. Both are driven primarily by power, and both serve even more powerful masters who struggle to carry out their will on the planet themselves. Warcraft III contextualizes its final chapter pretty competently in that regard. It's not hard to imagine these characters in an action RPG without the soldiers and the war, especially these two. But you're ultimately the commanding officers for and tacticians of impossibly powerful beings. Your actions affect empires, hence the RTS. The game ends with a showdown between these legendary figures. I always rooted for Illidan and probably always will. The guy cannot get a win, but when you look at it, I think Arthas just wanted it more. He wasn't held back by love, and even if he didn't necessarily want to, he was always willing to struggle through everything alone. Illidan schemed and arranged things in his favor, and for the few awful things he'd done, he was still kind and willing to help others. It might have been different if Kael or Vash stepped in to help in this final duel, but the fight is a wavering flame crashing against a wall of dense ice.
Very dramatic.
As Arthas ascends the frozen throne, we hear the voices of Uther and Muradin, all the times he was resisted or warned. Jaina's voice never crosses his mind, as though he's escaping. Freeing Ner'zhul and taking the crown ultimately means subsuming his identity and erasing Prince Arthas from history. Illidan was powerful, but he would never pay the ultimate price for his goals, or at least this version of the character. But Arthas was so proud and fell so far, there's a sense that accepting the crown and Ner'zhul's influence is a kind of spiritual debt, and that Arthas is seeking a perverse freedom, or absolution, in oblivion. So I think Warcraft III is a little compelling.
Even now, it's one of my favorite games. But what does that mean, favorite? It has nothing to do with the graphics. I never played the game at any kind of meaningfully competitive level. It's definitely not about the quality of the script, or about the music or vocal performances. Instead, what Warcraft III does is sell itself so convincingly, so thoroughly through its play, it resonates. It's something you cannot help but think about and care about. And it's really not hard to understand how they managed to take this and spin it into the most successful MMO of all time. At the metatextual level, I think Warcraft III's most resounding accomplishment is taking account of the player and its story. Missions don't have alternate endings, just win states and fail states. This is settled history in an enormous world, and you're only stepping into whichever character's shoes. But it's the small choices found in optional side quests which litter the main chapters, and in the ways the player acts in moments of crisis. Snuffing the plagued humans early, or letting them turn first, pursuing power when you should be chasing Illidan with Maiev, joining Hellscream on his raids, or fighting the humans on your own terms with your own power. Even something as small as allowing players to level the skills they want in the order they want to, all these small decisions give the player the tiniest role in telling the story themselves. You can't change the outcome of these collected stories, just like Arthas, Kael'thas, Jaina, Thrall, but you almost feel like you could, if only you were a better player. And when you've mastered its systems and hoarded your magic items and grown as powerful as possible in-game, conquered every challenge, only then do you know what it means for Arthas to take his seat on the frozen throne, removed from it all, sitting at the rim of the world, and nothing to fight for. Warcraft III isn't only its campaign. The game's online infrastructure, which was well supported for the time, ensured that ranked and casual multiplayer was globally available. It also shipped with a map editor and the ability to upload your own maps, meaning that players, fans, could craft the experience they wanted, whether aesthetic or mechanical or otherwise, and it offered it to other players. Warcraft III was fueled partially by its fans, people who resonated with what the lore and the story were doing, and decided to give back. It cannot be overstated how significant the community impact was, because Warcraft III's map editor tool inadvertently led to the massively played Defense of the Ancients game mode.
which would eventually create Heroes of Newerth, Dota 2, and League of Legends. Sure, you can trace back Dota's roots to older Warcraft titles via custom games, but the hero system is the genre. The game may not have lived up to the vision behind Warcraft Legends, but it was so potent regardless. Still, we're missing a few loose ends. You can look back from the original game to Warcraft III and see it sprout and reshape, responding to itself in small and significant ways over the years. Warcraft III included a bonus campaign for people who completed the core story, an experimental RPG built inside the game's engine, an entirely different genre of game using the same controls and the same pieces. It's stuff like this additional game mode that firmly established Blizzard as both a company with games to look forward to, and even as a company to trust. While I'm old now and know that no king rules forever, and no company can be trusted in the first place, Blizzard commanded a degree of fan loyalty unlike any other at the time, and mostly grown from sheer respect for their output. You weren't just getting a rock-solid computer game that told a complete story. With a full multiplayer experience and a creation tool to make your own things, you were also getting another kind of game tacked on for free. The Durotar campaign is centered on Rexxar, an outcast with both orc and ogre ancestry. Warcraft III was built on outcasts and misfits. Most of what World of Warcraft became and why the Horde spoke to people so loudly has to do with what Warcraft III established. The people of the Horde were never a swarm of godless monsters, but a group of disparate peoples bound together by a mutual need for survival and respect in a world that constantly denied them peace. Orcs after Warcraft II were not simply evil and wanted a place to belong, to write another future for themselves. Trolls, who were explicitly treated as evil by the Alliance, were lumped in with the Horde. Tauren, who had no business being treated as monsters except for their appearance and relative distance from human civilization, joined with who they knew, and who they first met as courageous warriors. The Forsaken only ended up in the Horde because they had no other people to call allies, outcasts and misfits. Anyway, Rexxar. You spent the bulk of the main Orc campaign establishing Durotar as a new home for the Orcs. It's a barren, harsh, and inhospitable land, not entirely unlike the lands just beyond the Dark Portal, and therefore may be the only real home for the Orcs, or the only one they deserve, after such a history of strife. You recruit a Troll Scout, a Pandaren Brewmaster, an Orc Blade Master, and Karen, alongside a host of temporary party members, this absolute pack of cretins, to carve out something resembling a home for these disparate peoples. The Rexxar campaign makes use of side quests, an inventory system, level ups, and other small systemic functions that we'd eventually see in World of Warcraft. It was a dry run for their upcoming blockbuster MMORPG. It's possible that whatever Warcraft Legends was this campaign as well. Blizzard wanted to handle more RPG-adjacent materials since the second game concluded, so it wouldn't be surprising. It's a bit removed from all the drama and cheese of the main campaign, but there's aesthetic value in that dynamic. The Rexxar campaign is dull and mostly easy. You sit there, stewing in the simplistic play, reflecting on the world and the game under the beating sun. It manages to sell its scenario pretty well. A group of people removed from the world-shaking struggles of the main game, scraping by and doing what they can for a small region. You feel it in the low-stakes side quests, building up Orgrimmar piece by piece, contributing how you can. It's worth noting the world itself is shrunken down, or rather, playing this campaign is like looking at Warcraft III under a microscope. Where enormous landmasses were cropped and abstracted to suit the scale of the conflict, Rexxar only operates in a few smaller areas, so the world is captured in a slightly more reasonable scale. You talk to a lot of regular people and small-time quirksters.
Wow, you're a big one!
It's always the same.
So much of Warcraft III is draped in high drama and delivered with the terseness of a comic book. Mountains of text and personal relationships smelted down and forged into flaming hot bars. Warcraft doesn't exclusively work because of its campy and melodramatic dialogue, but it's definitely an aesthetic cornerstone, which is why it carried over so often into World of Warcraft.
You confront a force beyond reckoning.
Your father dabbled in powers beyond reckoning. Where is he now?
Jesus, man, drink a chocolate milk. Calm down.
In Rexxar's adventure, you're much less concerned with any given conflict. Rexxar isn't the only relevant character, and most of the relevant characters are only passingly important. Rakan is a Shadow Scout and the expansion's new Orc hero. And the game doesn't explore him at all. At one point, you team up with a samurai orc named Samuro, who speaks in an absurd, stereotypical, approximating Japanese accent, and that's probably why this important founder of Durotar didn't show up in World of Warcraft properly. You meet a Pandaren brewmaster who was largely treated as a bonus character, a joke, until Blizzard canonized the guy by making an entire Pandaren expansion years later. Of course, the company was always playful, even in the old days, and people liked the humor they brought to their work. It was necessary. It cut through the overly melodramatic story for people who hate, cool stuff. It's also not entirely sauceless. The Rexxar campaign actually takes Warcraft back to Warcraft, Orcs and Humans. After stabilizing the region and mounting up a sizable army, you're pulled into a conflict with the humans of Kul Tiras, led by Admiral Proudmoore, Jaina's father. He's a veteran of the second game, a person who refuses to see how the orcs have changed, refuses to hear reason, and only sees things as far as the end of his sword, at least when it comes to orcs. It's critical that Admiral Proudmoore is killed, and that Jaina doesn't stop you. To this day, people bemoan what became of the universe, and sometimes for good reasons, but the shift in orcish identity can be traced back to Thrall, and further still to Lord of the Clans in the 90s. Because the original orc concept was juvenile. They're the kind of guys who'd paint a pentagram upside down out of blood, because it would scare suburban housewives. At some point, if Warcraft was going to be a proper universe, orcs had to be something, anything other than a caricature on a page. To tell its story, it needed to focus on exiles and outcasts. It needed a world people cared about, not a series of crusades against anyone with green skin. And Blizzard anticipated the reaction some folks would have. It built it into the game. Proudmoore is a storied veteran and a person who knows their exact place in the world, a proud leader and a defender of his people. What he's seen makes it impossible for him to trust, but he's also lacking perspective himself. His own daughter watched what becomes of men too set in their ways, and even fought alongside orcs to save the world from total ruin. He has every available resource to prove him wrong, and yet he refuses to acknowledge what his daughter has seen with her own eyes and done with her own hands. Acknowledging the personhood of the orcs and the other collected races, Jaina allows Rexxar and his people to sail into Theramore and slay the Admiral, to stop his incursions into Durotar. The old generation is severed from the new one. They had to. They were building a world. World of Warcraft became so popular it carried Blizzard almost single-handedly into the future. Scores of expansions, decades of history, World of Warcraft was so successful, it overshadowed its roots, rendered them irrelevant to entire generations of players. It became an entity unto itself, and so there was no Warcraft IV. Blizzard's RTS aspirations were handed off to StarCraft. Characters established in Warcraft were pulled back time and again to sell expansions. Long-rotted corpses puppeteered through the streets to move units. I don't mean to be cynical. World of Warcraft is a game so addictive that I avoid it at all costs. I love it a lot. But all of that narrative construction, that pedigree, was unceremoniously dumped for a deeply consumptive MMO that was largely successful for the ways it pried open the player's wallet. It rapidly spun out of control, handling old characters without grace and morphing beyond recognition within a series of expansions. However strong the foundation Warcraft III laid, no ever-shifting thing survives perpetual transmogrification. We probably should have seen it coming. At the time of Vanilla WoW, the monthly fee was shocking, to me at least, but acceptable enough to allow for global fandom. Over time, it's become apparent that World of Warcraft was one of the great harbingers of the shift in the games industry. Bobby in the Files Kotick took the CEO spot in 2009, and the rest is history. It was never going to be about crafted works in the games industry of the future, because the real target was endless playtime, recurring fees, passive income streams, branding, franchising, marketing, big business. Warcraft was too good for this world, and that's why it had to die. Finally, we arrive at the remaster. Warcraft Reforged is a total graphical overhaul of Warcraft III. It launched in January 2020, a perfect prelude to a horrible series of years, and it fully replaced the original game in the Blizzard launcher, meaning that if you wanted to play the original Warcraft III, the one you purchased, you couldn't. They forced players into their modern framework, which wouldn't have been so bad if it was only about optionally updating graphics. While the overhaul pretty transparently existed to make one of Blizzard's most successful games look better in titanic quotation marks really says it all when it comes to player tastes and how they look at the medium. Warcraft Reforged ended up breaking its own online functionality and came preloaded with scores of problems that took years of patching to unfuck. I don't want to just blame Blizzard. You have to understand that the Blizzard that developed Warcraft III and the Blizzard that launched Warcraft Reforged are completely different companies. Some of the folks who helped turn Warcraft and other Blizzard games into household names were long gone by the time Reforged came along.
And he said, Overwatch has to make in 2020. And then every year after that, it needs a recurring revenue. If it doesn't do dollars, we're going to lay off 1,000 people, and that's going to be on you.
Some of them left before Vanilla WoW. And this gets me thinking about the Rexxar campaign. Because Reforged was handled so poorly, this entire piece of bonus material is eventually rendered unplayable within an hour or so. An entire piece of history, one that you previously owned and could play, ripped out of your hands and broken. It's hard to overstate the incompetence of the thought leaders behind these decisions. Like, what if we had Archimon take over the company? Yeah, man, what if? This, I guess. So to play through Rexxar's story, you have to access a normal version of the game illegally, or download the original discs directly to your computer, like me, with a USB CD drive, because my PC doesn't have one of those anymore. Rexxar's story is the continuation of the Horde story, what they did after they finally found a place to call home. It's hard not to look at Durotar as a metaphor for the younger Blizzard success, a place for those ragtag misfits, a whole future laid out before them. And the issues inherent to Reforged, stripping this mode away, even accidentally, as the symbolic death of that promise. That future was lived, grew complicated, and fell apart, like almost every campaign in the game. Nothing lasts forever, and no one gets out clean. Warcraft Reforged hit at such a critical time in my life. It was somewhere in the early video days, slowly starting to take the medium seriously, slowly losing affection for things, creative properties I didn't own, that I'd staked too much of my care and attention on, and watching the very company whose work I loved so much digitally erase a thing I loved for the sake of making it worse on purpose was an eye-opening experience, just blatantly anti-consumer, but also anti-player, anti-fan. Because someone somewhere thought they really needed to meddle with something that was just fine lying fallow. The minute they disturbed that settled history, things went wrong. You know, nothing against World of Warcraft, but for Warcraft itself, as its own contained series, it's pretty apparent that we're living through the Dark Ages now. Well, either way, I don't believe in heroes anymore. If you put your stock in anything, anyone other than yourself, you're opening yourself up to a wound. That's fine. Everyone does, and this is a game. It's not all that serious. You can divest and keep a healthy distance before your favorite thing goes sour. But it's coming. I mean, Jesus, as a YouTube nitwit, I've been that for some people, even in small ways. I think millennials and maybe younger generations feel that kind of small and trite betrayal so much more deeply because so much of what we were raised on was franchising, products. If you bought into Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Beyblades or Pokemon or Digimon as a kid, anything that was packaged and sold and pushed, that became a sort of micro-identity. So much of those properties are about expressing identity. Who's your favorite Pokemon or Pokemon type? What's your bit beast? Who is your deck master? Follow those things and you eventually ran into a betrayal of some kind, whether due to publisher intentions or seemingly deliberate mishandling. No thing was ever trustworthy, and that means the foundation of your upbringing and the ways you imagine the world were untrustworthy. It's a shame that so much of millennial childhood was seemingly built around capitalism, like consumer fads and franchises, colored by whoever had the most money to ship the most product, whoever successfully pandered to children the best, and whoever played the game as strategically as possible, like early Blizzard did. But I'm imagining a world where I didn't have to constantly break my personal investment with enjoyable things. We go through this cycle with public figures, from company leaders to entertainers. I don't know a single person who hasn't suffered from that exact kind of shock, realizing another person isn't all you imagine them to be. And maybe we just have unrealistic expectations, as though all of us are heroes ourselves and only make good decisions and have no pressing concerns in our lives that force our hands and let the cards fall when they do. I like to tell people to play the hand they're dealt, but it's hard when the cards just keep slipping, and we spend so much time and effort trying to hold on. I don't know why I believed in heroes in the first place. At some point, you're stuck in your own reality, like impossibly different from anyone else's, and forced to rely on your own ability anyway. Whether that leads to misery, joy, or nothing, I think that's ultimately why Warcraft spoke to people. It knew the truth about every one of us, that we'll have good points and bad, that we'll be hated at the very first word by some and loved by others unconditionally. And that all of these entangled identities make for a vastly more complex ecosystem than any one person could manage. So things get built, others fall apart, people pass, and you carry your little trinkets, your skills, and your experience ever onward.
Hey, thanks for making it to the end. Here's my $4 patrons. Let me blow your ears out. Adam Welsh, A.G. Charlton bullying K-Bash into reading my books. Air Pirate Sid, A.K. Acropolon, Alpha 42, Emperor Sandy, Angel Rivera, Angus, Anthony, Aralon, Aria, Aaron, Ashley, my wife, my darling. I asked K-Bash to make you smile. Also, hi, Merrick. Asriel, Azura, Atticure, Owleye, Axonate, Bear Skeleton, Basement Dweller, Bosch 7, Basil, Be Gay, Do Crimes, Bella, more like Smella, Bell Peppers and Ben M, Big Guile, Big Damn Gamer, Big Papa Spray, Bill Brick, Biodigital Jazzman, Bite of Cursed Sushi, Blake Against the Machine, Largle Hargle, Blossom Dante, Boom Dead, BH Operator, Orgor, Born in Shadow, Brandon Hannah Barger, Brandon S, Brendan Hesse, British Goose, Brian McKnight, Cal, Cajun Lady, Cakesar, C-Dub, Casual Male XL, Caesar T, Cherokee Bola, Chiro Hero, Chloric Fox, Cordon, Chris Bromo, Cody Golden, Comfy Move, Kami Hog, Couch MOBA, Cosmetic, Crabmonger, Fish Finagler, Trashkers, Crater, Crispy J, Chrono 19D, Cup of the Papa, CW Glassworks, Cyborg Jiro, Danky Stag, Swacky Bay, David Castillo, Dara, Dash Granny, Deadward, Destrega, Deform. Did you know if you put a wooden spoon on your pot while it's boiling, the pot spoon water will spill the water pot, the boiling pot water steams spoon wood? Dingus back. Don't read this out loud. Oh no, he did Doodle Flu, Doug Prince, DJ Professor K, Dr. House from the critically acclaimed television show House MD, Dr. Cullen PhD, Drop the Bass, Duffman, the protagonist, Dylan Winston, Eclair, El Jaguar, Electric Song, Elefal, Alpio, Emperor Pickle, Empty Tenchi, Eric Monticello, Erica Black, Excalibur Shines, Sorian Hagen, Thnar, Farrakhan's just happy to be Burns here, Maximum, Fazillion, Forte Noir, Frog Vorbis, Frosty Gamer, Gandalf the Garen, Guaranteed, Gigglebite, Glyph Seeker, Gobo Bobo, Gobsmack, Goose 6112, Goose Dollars, Bray the Darkest Black, Griffey Turner, Gucci Plant, Hatsune Miku's Crack House, Archive, Heman, Game Station, Helen Dingo, Hermit J, Hebe, Honeymutt, Horn Tiger, Horse Boots. How do you know? I just took 7 grams of magic mushrooms and now I'm lost in the woods. Imagination Act. I'm supporting K-Bash just because I wanted to make this part of the video longer. Inferno galore. IOBG. I punched a sandwich. It's not bad. It's time to sue. It's not good. Jack Hydrick. Jacob. Jalopy. James. Jams. Jank Dankins. Jason Lasky. Jaden. James Vaughn. Jar of Screaming Eyes. Jay Drito. J.L. Savarez. J. Deus. JB. Jetty 2. JJ09. JK Hedgehog. John Bo the Joker. Jordan Joyner. Chorzy Burden. Juicy Frost. July. Lunar Butterfly. June. Kadoki. Khaled. K-Chan. Keegan Too Cool. Keith the Thief. Key the Iron Idol. Kata Snack. King Kuma. Key. Kenite Pike. Karasek. Kitty Caddis. Clock. Tenoi. Cone 2020. Clayton. Crazy Dark Chocolate. Crumperton. Tice. Kyle. Kyle. Not that Kyle. KZ Excellent. Lady Weeb. Lasset. Laundry Mom. Lego Sid. Lethal Nibbles. Linkle. Little Big Trouble. Loathsome Dung Eater. Lion Shard. Lawn. Low Red. Low Fat Mogert. Lucas Boy. Blood Mac James. Lunatic. Lunar Prince Garbo. Magnet Head. Magic Meows. Malamatic Wolf. Manapool. Manic Pixie Space Pirate. Man in Space. Malfever. Mara Ganger. Marcules. Marcus Rambles. Max Muller. Maxwell B. Maximum Dawn. Needy Smacks. Mechanized Memories. Maple Puppet. Mega Boy E-Nasty. Mellytan. Mary Bites. Messiah of Rodents. Metal Gear Gashes. Michelle Citrano. Migsy. Mike Deviar. Mikusagi. Minadams. Mint Noodles. Mithras. Moa. Mommy Dummy Big Titty Goth GF Queen. Monochrome Rainbow. Morgana Black. Mori. Morn. Morte. Modi. Mr. Mango. Mr. PP Pupukaka. Mr. Yeety Dab Face McYoink Bomb. Moogie. Myrna. Naira. Nido Torpedo. Neon Dwarf. Nick Krishna. Nick LaRosa. Nifty Rex. Not Nobel. Hell, I forgot to think of something funny for the K-Bash credits. Next month for sure. Okami. OJ McMuffins. Oh, Burgle. Old Man Cranberry. Ollie. Omni Nerd Zero. 137. Only LK. Kaplant. Oscar. Owlbear Breakfast. Paper Lancy. PBK. Pandemic Cowboy. Pelagic Undulation. PK Gaming. P-Mike. Popular Hitman. Prismatic Dan. Pringle. Probably not great. Project Darklight. Punch Fighter Champion. Honosaurus Rex. Quasar McDougal. Quillworth. Raging Ataraxia. Real Beans. Reasonable Dingus. Red Death. Reggie Rodriguez. Renteca Bond. Ringed Relay. Rollets Bowtie. Orlando. RP Gamer. Are you You okay? Busto
Ryan Michel.
Saigon Man.
Siren
smells good.
Salmon Coder.
Salsa.
Salty Smasher.
Gabrius.
Scribe Slendy.
Sakaya no Awarda.
Sensual Coder.
Saphirium.
Sexy Bionicle GF. Sergeant Shitbrick. Shod. Shintendo. Shut up, Wesley. Singe. Sim.
God.
Sir Doodles a lot. Seriously tired of waiting in
Sir
line.
Giggles XD.
Sir Speedster.
Skywardly.
Sleepy Wabbit.
Slippy
Sloppy Bippy Boppy. Snort. Small Turtle House. So Zeta Dad. Sock'em Boppers. Space Lizard. Sparks. Spider Dad.
Squidget.
Star Night Sky.
Static Linkage.
Streffen Battles.
Sully. Sunny Bee.
Super Sandwich Guy.
Toxin.
Jorn Chubbington. Terrence Swift. The artist formerly known as Sam the Sam. The Big Bubby.
The Brandorian.
The Clown Prince of Cringe.
The Good
Lord has blessed me. Hallelujah. The Green Loki.
The Crispy
The
Boy.
Peacemaker Pyro.
The Salt
The
Knight.
Nomad.
The Toasted One.
Thick Dick Mystic.
This is the Monato's power.
Thresh. Thrips Hartrop. Tiggles McGuffin. Tim Lobster. Timid the Writer. Total Play. Travis Edwards. Twiddle Chungus. Ty Guy 9001.
Udit Singh.
Unlawful Skies crippling gotcha addiction. Vid. Vacant Plaza. Valenrist. Venom.
Verum Leonhardt.
Vice Puff. Viewers like you. Vic. Volkento. Joaquin, get right in my bag. Waposa. Wayne is boss. Weeb Trash. Well, shit. Waylon. What's in a name?
Where am I?
Whiskey
Help!
Dono.
Ouija.
Wrenching. Zanny Tanner.
Giandi.
Travius. Yarrow 12. Yashuchi.
Give me a name.
Zane the Impure. Zane the Pure. Zephigamon. Full Burner. Zero Maru 2. Zero Zalazar. Cyberbunk. If you'd like to help support the show, help me keep investing, making interesting looks at the medium, hit me up on Patreon. See you soon. K-Bash out.